Okay, welcome everybody. It's 7 o'clock, so I guess we shall start. I'm going to start by asking Chris to cover the any apologies, Chris.
Yes, Chairman. Just before I go through the apologies, just some general housekeeping. Just please note that this meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council website in due course. Therefore, please could I remind councillors and officers to use their microphones when speaking. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although the Chairman has ultimate discretion and may halt any recording or broadcast should he feel that this is disrupting proceedings. Please note that this meeting room is fitted with an induction loop for the benefit of hearing aid users. Hearing aids should be switched to T setting. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests, so if the alarm does go off, please leave the building by way of nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the front of the Town Hall building. I shall accompany any disabled persons to the refuge area along the corridor and wait with them for assistance. This meeting is open to the public but is not a public meeting, which means that only those registered to speak may do so, and members of the public in attendance are asked not to disrupt this evening's proceedings. Finally, please could I ask that mobile phones be switched off or switched to a silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. Moving on to apologies. I have received no apologies for absence this evening. Therefore, moving on to item 2, there are no substitute members. Declarations of interest, item number 3. Are there any? That's a no, which takes us on to the terms of reference, which are for noting this evening.
Thank you, that's great. So yeah, the terms of reference we discussed in preparing for this meeting, and the leader and chief executive have looked at those. They are published on the public website now. Okay, so if we can move on to public issues. We don't think we have any public questions.
No requests to speak have been received this evening.
So no statements or petitions either. That's lovely. Okay. So item 6, South East Dorset City Region's Transforming Cities Fund. This is a really key and big piece of work for us coming up. It's here tonight for us for information, but I think the reason for this is because there are going to be a whole series of programme of individual elements that will be funded by this method, assuming we're successful, and it's a bid to government, so we haven't got it yet. But we will have 3 years to implement, and it will be a tight timeline and a lot of work for officers to make it happen, and a lot of consultation with the public, some of which this will be the right forum to make that happen, I think. So, Richard, would you like to talk to the paper?
Just check this on. Okay, so just for clarity, the report in front of you sets out our progress since the October Cabinet report. In summary, the Council, in partnership with Dorset Council, submitted an application to the Department for Transport in the form of a strategic outline business case at the end of November, on the 28th of November. The deadline was 6 p.m. and we submitted it in advance of that. At the time of submission, we were not allowed to publicise the fact that we'd submitted the application because we were in Purdah ahead of the general election. The SOBC basically sets out, as per DFT's request, 3 levels of ask. So there's a low ask, a medium ask and a high ask, which are all set out in the report. And the low ask from DFT for Transforming Cities Fund funding is 79 million towards a 99 million pound programme. The medium ask is for 99 million towards a 118 million pound programme, and the high ask is for 115 million towards a 135 million pound programme. And these are all effectively set out in the appendices as our plans, showing the sort of footprint of the major corridor proposals that are included within the SOBC. The report also highlights that the Council was due to attend a challenge session at the Department for Transport in January to actually present its bid. They'd previously described it as almost like a Dragon's Den style session. Following the announcement of the general election, their programme for assessing the SOBCs has shrunk and so they've subsequently cancelled that. So it just explains that. And instead, we're just going to effectively find out from DFT between now and the end of March 2020 as to whether we're successful or not with our SOBC, or our bid for Transforming Cities funding, for want of a better word. And other than that, there's been no further activity. The only thing we've received from DFT since the submission is just them seeking some clarifications on some of the elements of the strategic outline business case relating to the modelling, which was a component of that. The report also advises that funding has been reprioritised within the current year capital programme, within the 1920 LTP capital programme, and that's basically to fund activities that we need to really get in motion ahead of the 2020-2021 financial year, which is when any funding from the Transforming Cities Fund would effectively kick in. Such activities include, establishing the governance, programme management, preparing a comms strategy, setting up engagement, early work from the engineering team. So when you're going to be design or consulting any sort of scheme, you need to have utilities plans, to effectively understand your constraints, etc., etc. There's obviously data gathering, because it is a programme that DFT will be monitoring, and they'll be looking for key outputs which are identified in the SOBC. So we have to demonstrate that we've effectively met those objectives. And so in order to do that, we need to do a bit of baseline data gathering. And that's basically consistent. The level of funding that's reported in there that we're moving around within the programme is consistent with the upcoming financial monitoring report, which will be going to Cabinet from Financial Services on the wider capital programme, the overarching capital programme from the overall council. Beyond that, it's just really for noting at this stage, and obviously as part of the next steps, we'll be establishing the governance for the programme, and indicative governance was set out in the SOBC, which obviously includes members from Dorset and from BCP Council, and that will be some of the activities that are being set up between now and the end of March.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for all the work you put into it, because I know you personally, but the whole team have put in an awful lot of work to meet the...
They're all sat there.
Yeah, absolutely. The Department of Transport's deadlines and their queries on that. So thank you for that. And I think the graphics that are in the appendix are actually really useful. That's in the front of the SOBC, but it lays out some of the challenge that we've got and what we're trying to deal with. Tony.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Is there any danger, bearing in mind the way the last general election worked out and the commitment towards tipping resources to the north, is there any danger that we might actually find our programme adversely affected in the decision process because of what at the moment, although it's words at the moment, but if it, they decide to prioritise schemes in the north to sort of try to rebalance the north-south thing, do you see that as a possible threat to our bid?
Obviously, that's something that's completely beyond my control, and all that we've done is follow the due process that's been set out by the Department for Transport, which was to submit an SOBC. They worked with us in the co-development of that strategic outline business case. They've made it clear that they wanted to see benefit cost ratios in excess of 2 for the SOBC to be attractive to them. The BCR for the low ask was actually 4.1, so that's way above what they were, expecting. So, and similarly for the medium ask, it was 3.4, and for the low ask, for the high ask, it was 3. So, in terms of everything that we can do and everything we're in control of, we've done as much as we can to state as good a case as we can for our city region in partnership with Dorset Council.
Councillor Brooks, sorry, I should have said Tony Councillor Trent. Councillor Brooks.
Yes, thank you. Coming up to speed on your report, and thank you for it. What is the total value of the Transformation Cities Fund that the government is offering?
It was 1.1 billion nationally.
And second point, do you know how many bids were actually submitted?
There's 12 city regions that have been shortlisted, so there have been 12 effectively SOBCs from those city regions that have been.
So it wasn't actually a bidding well, it was a bidding process, but effectively we were invited to bid. So they invited 12 cities to bid. In fact, originally we weren't one of the ones they invited, so we were a late addition. Sorry. Any more questions? Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I think, Richard, if I remember right, it's in the paper as well, the amount was increased to 1.22 billion. And I think that when you take into account all the bits that they were adding in, I think originally we were actually looking at about 1.4 was the total pot.
Sorry, you're correct. I stand corrected.
Thank you.
Sincere apologies.
Yeah.
I've got the report in front of me. I'm halfway down the page, and it increased to 1.22 billion.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, and that's when the additional 2 cities were brought in.
And
apologies.
I think actually with the
that actually
extra bits,
predated my involvement. So
No problem.
but hands up. Yeah.
That was.
Sorry.
I'm going to preface the little that I'm just going to say in that this does keep very much to the essence of what we wanted when we first put this forward and got accepted as the predecessor councils. So I'm very supportive of that. I think the way that the report has been put together is excellent, very, very clear and convincing, and I'm supportive as well in the distribution of the bids themselves. So I very much want to put that on record and add my thanks for the officers for having taken it forward from where we were in May to get to this point. I think they've done so in a great way. I have to say again, though, that I am disappointed in the amounts that are being bid for. As Richard pointed out, the BCRs are extremely healthy. In our informal discussions with DFT prior to May, it had been indicated that we were going to be in line for 120 and we might want to bid for a bit more. So we're now looking at the highest ask as being lower than we'd given the nod on when Julie and I were going to the meetings in Trowbridge. And that is, to me, it may be that with the change of administration that DFT saw an opportunity to lower expectations. Whatever it is, I do think that disappointment needs to be noted. I don't know whether you want to come back on that. I have a question as well.
Okay, I think certainly we were asked even on the low bid to prioritise on that. So there was very much, it's been a negotiated process, and the centre have been sort of whether they've been testing out how low we could go. But I think we've done well to try and keep that range and to go for the maximum. Julian, do you want to?
I'm not sure how to do it. Is that on? Yeah. You're absolutely right. At the early stages of the bidding, bearing in mind that we came a year later than 10 cities, the government were very clear in terms of civil servants that were talking to us and the team that we presented to at the very early stages, that this was a real opportunity for the 1.22 billion to be carved up between the 12 cities. That's still the case, but the reality of the discussions, which were quite frequent, with the civil service team that are actually currently looking at all of the bids and will be the very, very same people that actually score them, was that the advice changed during the summer. In August, I remember the day. It wasn't raining. One of the few. And we went to London, and the game changed. That's where they introduced the need for 3 levels of funding. They assured us that was the case for all cities, and that was based on the fact that they wanted to look at the variance in terms of that. So that's why you can see 3 sets of funding levels. So the goalposts have changed during the process, and for whatever reasons we don't know, other than the likelihood that they are likely to be oversubscribed, as they have been for the last 4 or 5 bids that have gone into government, heavily oversubscribed. So they're trying to do some sort of modelling of the returns for the different levels. and they've asked us to prioritise the needs within those. So it was nothing to do with a local position or any political position. It was simply the national position. If that helps.
Thank you. I think that, the other bit of that is about our capacity. So there is something about this is a big programme for the next 3 years on top of what we were already planning to do in our own thing. So there is something about building capacity. And I think that's something that we need to do as a council going forwards, as BCP, as a larger authority than the three previous authorities, to be able to handle spending this amount of money over a 3-year period is going to be a task for us to do. And the disruption on the network, and I've already had one of the bus companies write to me about their concerns about the level of disturbance to their network and to their operation from the amount of roadworks that's going on just with existing things like the gas main repairs and the other things like that. So I think it is about trying to do something that's ambitious, but also that we are capable of delivering, so we can make sure that when we go back for more money, which we undoubtedly will, and you mentioned the Western Gateway, that's another route to significant monies and the urban transport opportunities, that we are credible because we spent this money wisely. So sorry, yes, you've got another question.
That sort of leads on to onto another one, actually, Chairman. Again, let me just emphasise, even if we only get 79.3 million, that's a huge amount of money, and that's why I'm fully supportive of the amount of capital that's being spent on working up the bids and the budget that has been put in place for it. And if it turns out that we don't get any money out of it, I recognise and accept that some of that money will not be recoverable. It will not be useful to other schemes, and you will be getting no criticism from me about the fact that money has been spent and won't come back. I think that is the correct gamble to take. So I'm very, very content with that. I'm concerned to hear that it may be capacity related. I certainly believed in May that we did have the capacity to be looking at, well, pretty much double the low bid, that we would have been able to get that through, and so that does concern me. But you also mentioned, Chairman, about the about our record of delivery, and that comes out as well in the bottom of page 5. It says that the councils have excellent record of delivery, and as such, blah blah blah. I am concerned for that in the... Well, let me rephrase that. How do you square that with the approach that's been taken over Wessex Fields, where the money was fought for with obviously DFT ultimately, but coming through the LEP? We in Bournemouth, but Dorset and Poole equally did have that reputation that if you went to those councils and said, will you bid for this, they knew that we were going to put everything into it, that we would spend it, and we would spend it wisely, and we would spend it within budget and on time. I fear that with what's happened on Wessex Fields, that will have taken a bit, that confidence that people would have in the councils here will have taken a pretty severe knock.
Okay, well, that's your opinion. I think what we've done with Wessex Fields is actually we have spent the money that the LEP had available to us. They didn't have the money available for phase 2. That was that was from a different route. That was from the Western Gateway, and that was only got as far as a bid. So we hadn't got that money secured. And more importantly, this is about sustainable transport, and that's very much part of the climate emergency and where we're going with that. And that was a decision that was taken specifically in view of where we expect, or where we know that the people going to that area are coming from, which is mostly the conurbation and not from out of town. So there is we're very clear about why we took that decision. Yes, appreciate, and part of that discussion was talking to the LEP, talking to the Western Gateway, and it is about building on what we've done. But I think we were trying to do the best we could there. Councillor Rice.
Just looking at the infographics and the summary on page 9 and 10, I was just thinking about sort of once the scheme is finished and useful statistics, just around perception of fear and there's probably quite a lot of interesting things that we can measure, isn't there? But just to highlight sort of thinking going forwards about the data collection, and just thinking about some of the routes that are going to be created, measuring the perception of fear at the moment, and then recording that after we've completed the schemes, could be really useful data to show nationally how well we do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd hope to turn that around to perception of confidence as a result of the investment rather than perception of fear about the network as it currently exists, but I appreciate that's where we are. Any more? Yes, okay, Councillor Farquhar.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Julian, for clearing up the change of situation with central government. I think we've finally put that to bed as regards we've put in the bid on time, appropriately before the deadline, including the general election, to make the best chance for what we can possibly get. My question is on the infographics, and I love an infographic. I absolutely, so whoever put that together, much obliged. I'm quite keen on the executive summary as well, because it's a very useful communication method to our public. And to take on Councillor Rice's point, then this is a measurement of success over the period of the transformation for sustainable transport. My question, however, is the figure 480,000 for the SED city region population. I think I might well know the answer, that we're including people that travel into the conurbation as opposed to residents, but I'd just like clarification where that figure came from.
Okay, thank you. It is resident and daytime population. So if you look at the graph, the map at the bottom of that same page, it shows in a slightly darker blue the elements of East Dorset that are also part of this. So it's a partnership bid between ourselves and Dorset Council for particularly areas like Upton and Wimborne and Ferndown, and includes routes that run into those areas. So it is about the people who might be commuting, coming to school, shopping in our area in particular.
Thank you, Chair. If I may follow up. So my follow-up, get out of it. My follow-up question then is the studies for these individuals that are daytime traffic or daytime commuters, whether it be school or etc. How did we arrive at those figures? Is there like a survey that's done? I mean, with employers, etc. In other words, how accurate is that, and what sort of effect do we anticipate that on Councillor Green's point for Wessex Fields, whether or not it has a road all the way through it or not?
Richard, do you?
That's basically from the census, effectively. Yeah. And then obviously projections, so it's multiplied up based on, there's multiplication factors that can be applied for.
So it's a census once every 10 years, so it's 2011 is the latest census, and it's
so
based factor on a growth factor on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go.
Okay, thank
I've
you.
already spoken, so I would like to ask, but
okay. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. It seems to me that the proposals which are set out in the blue for how we're going to change the perception and the reality of the way people get around is going to be, at the end analysis, quite dramatic. But I have a concern, and I wonder to what extent there was, as part of the build-up of this bid, that the thinking is to get people out of their cars at peripheral points or nodal points with park and ride facilities, which have worked so well in other cities around the UK. Was that a consideration in putting this together, or is that something that you're going to work on in the future?
So just coming back to that point, with regards to the Transforming Cities Fund bid, we can only really include things that are deliverable within a 3-year programme. Okay, and effectively, personally, I don't think that park and ride is realistic within 3 years, because you've obviously got to acquire the sites, build the sites, establish the sites, check that they're commercially viable, etc., etc. The council in October, it might have been possibly November, in fact, could even be December, apologies, but recently approved a strategic parking review. And as part of that strategic parking review, that will consider park and ride as part of it. The council at the moment also is funded by the LEP, completing what's called the SEDM study, which is the South East Dorset Urban Mobility Study. which is an update to the 2009-2010 South East Dorset multimodal transport study. There you go. Predated me. Predated me within the. Oh, there you go. So essentially, the outputs of that will inform Park and Ride, effectively. But because it wasn't deliverable within the timescale of the TCF bid, it wasn't included within the TCF bid. But it's something, obviously, policy-wide, I would imagine that our administration are very keen to deliver as part of the climate change agenda. Is that answered your question, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Julian, want to say something?
Just to say that Rich is absolutely right. There are a number of strands in the policy provision, but and what the officers shall be doing in the future is to recommend that we refresh the local transport plan, which is currently number 3, which was based on all of that technical work previously. There's a lot of change in terms of technology, in terms of the need for us to refresh the policy side of things. I think government is a different time now than in 2011 when the LTP was progressed, but within the current policy is for a strategic park and ride around the edge of the area, and until that policy is altered, then that remains the current policy.
I think part of our challenge is because we're very multi-centred. So if you go to Bath or Bristol, then they have a one centre that everything's focused in on. But because we've got so many different parts of the conurbation that people are travelling to, it does make how you make that a viable proposition more difficult. And part of this is about trying to take traffic off the whole network. So I think that's part of, I guess, what we need to think about in terms of the parking review and that strategic thing. I'll come to Councillor Green first, and then I'll see Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. And just on Park and Ride, I'm sure that the Seddon study will give us a great deal of information which may be useful not to look at various different options and also give us an opportunity to speak with the rail companies about, again, once we know better how many people either go or want to go from this point to that point, we will be so much better informed to be able to look at which options are available, and within those to make the calculation effectively about how much cost financial is, if you like, equivalent to. I would like to see a pounds per tonne of carbon saved, effectively, as being the budget. I know you and I, Julie and I, have spoken about this in the past, but about having a way of grading potential schemes around what the cost is for the environmental benefit. When we come to Park and Ride, and again, we recognise that we still have that strategic desire for it, but as Councillor Brooks said, there are some successful schemes around the country, but there are also some extremely expensive schemes for the taxpayer around the country. I think the last time I looked, only one Park and Ride scheme was actually positive in financial terms. Obviously, there are the other benefits, which is where that balance comes in. But I think we should be very careful that we don't start with the solution being Park and Ride and then come to where we are. My question was on something completely different, which is when just before when the previous iteration came to Cabinet and to ONS before that, the leader of the council said that no Cabinet member had been involved in the discussions with DFT at that point. She actually went further and admitted that she hadn't even spoken to any of the MPs about it, who had been really supportive in getting us to the stage that we are. And that was all the way through till November. Since then, have there been discussions between Cabinet members and the DFT to try to get this through, and also between Cabinet members and our MPs, who again can advocate for us in a very effective way?
So the answer to that is yes. So as part of the process, members of the DFT came down to spend it wasn't a whole day with us, but it was a day, and one of the bus companies laid on a bus to take them around part of that, and we got them on barrel bikes. And had a discussion, a technical discussion, which went mostly over my head, but I was there throughout that to support and egg that on. I believe that the leader has written to the Department of Transport to make the case as well. So I think yes, we have done. It is a balance about and it's always difficult, isn't it? How much do you lobby without being overburdensome? But we have certainly tried to do that, including on rail, and I have been again passing information to ministers to make the case for Dorset to get a reasonable go at rail. That obviously involves things, particular issues around the level crossing in Poole, but if we want to increase the frequency of trains, but having a locally focused service, and again, as part of giving people a realistic, fast alternative to get across the conurbation. So definitely on the case on those things. Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We do have one built park and ride, the one at Creekmore, and rather conveniently, I think as part of their Brexit preparations, the government did some work on it and upgraded it. And I'm sort of wondering whether there's scope for a bit of experimentation using that. I know it's used as a seasonal park and ride, but I'm sort of wondering, and I know that there's some things in the background which might actually benefit it, but it'd be rather useful to at least trial that, because that effectively serves Poole Town Centre. If there's anything we need to sort of find out about how to make it work, as I say, we have a site there in place with all the necessary tarmac and everything to do that with. So okay. I'm wondering whether that is a possibility.
Thank you. We did the work, the government paid for it, and that was to be able to, if we need to, as I understand it, to store lorries. So it's not sort of, they haven't done the work to upgrade it as a park and ride, so there would be some additional costs, I suspect. I don't know if the council would like to respond.
Just to clarify, that work has been done with a Brexit base. The problem that we always have in looking at the way forward in terms of park and ride is that actually in terms of capital and to provide the right service, that's an investment, and that's less tricky than actually getting the revenue to run the site. So it's always very difficult because the council, like every other council in the country, has very little revenue in terms of its funding. So the idea of a trial could potentially be the case. What we did do, going back to the original studies and the LTP itself, was to actually ask for the public what their views were, and that's how the Park and Ride came to being as a strategy. What we will do is to refresh that evidence and seek out the public view. I think it's really important to, as Mike has said earlier, not to start with a solution, but to actually seek out the view from the public in terms of whether or not that would be used, rather than investing and seeing. But there is a potential there. But obviously, with only one park and ride identified and built, then that's very difficult to run a strategic position in terms of the network wide. There are other sites allocated within the local plan currently, but the local plan itself is now going to be refreshed. So all of that consideration technically will come in the next year or so to feed into the land use patterns that we envisage, and those will come before members. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think the other thing with that is potentially employers parking. So I think there have been discussions in the past with some of the big employers in Poole about whether they could make sensible use of that site and obviously run the transport that goes with it, and therefore meet the revenue commitments as they needed to be.
Some did use it experimentally a few years ago, and I don't know how much of it is still being used. I think, was it Poole Hospital used it for a while, but it's sort of, it's a resource there. As I say, I don't know how much does need to be done to it, but it's a resource there that can be used, and at the moment it's a seasonal resource, and obviously quite helpful at Christmas. But
okay, thank you. Councillor Farquhar, I think we'll make this the last one if we may, and move on after this.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate committees like this because it's very useful to sort of bounce off ideas, etc. There's a couple which would probably be paired up quite nicely, Councillor Green's and Councillor Rice's. This pound per CO2 saved, this carbon saving. In other committees, around development, etc., then the consideration of how much carbon is spent building is not in the equation. But coming back to the infographics, because I think I mentioned I love an infographic, it seems quite convenient here that we got 17 million day and overnight visitors directly above our 2030 carbon neutral target. I would strongly encourage that when we're looking at strategic review for whether it be park and ride or other sustainable ways, and I take on board Councillor Green's research that only one seems to be financially viable, e.g. as a revenue stream, is that the focus is on how much carbon from these 17 million visitors that we'll actually save by putting in an alternative form of transport, whether it be park and ride or something similar.
Thank you. And I suppose part of that is some of the cycle routes in particular may well also be tourist attractions because they get people to the countryside surrounding us. So there is something about how we can promote some of what we build in terms of its tourism value, and encouraging people to be sustainable in how they work. Thank you very much. I'm going to move us on, otherwise I think we could discuss this all night, but this is going to come back to us, and it is a really significant piece of work. So thank you to all the officers, and thank you for all your comments. I think it's really helpful to cover that. The next item is a whole series of items. So this is going to be a fairly standing issue for us, I guess. The traffic regulation orders are a mechanism by which we advertise and take feedback on issues that are raised either by the public or by sometimes emergency services or our own waste collection in terms of how we can tweak the network. I'm aware, sorry, I didn't say at the start, that the item after this, which is a specific James Road, one of the people who was involved in that asked for us to defer that to the next meeting because he couldn't make it, so we've agreed to do that. So we're not going to discuss the James Road scheme. But Richard, do you want to introduce? I'm not sure whether one of your officers is going to do this.
Yep, so the next item up is traffic regulation orders. These are actually packaged up into there are multiple reports feeding into a single report. I think the first sheet of the report on page 23 is pretty self-explanatory. So what we'll do is, without any further ado, we'll just go through item numbers, sub-item numbers, 1, 2, 3. They may be A, B and C in your package. Yeah, there you go. So we'll start with sub-report A, and obviously I've got Chris Parks, an officer that's just going to come up and present this report.
So, sorry, can I just clarify before we do that? So we're going to take them one at a time and have a discussion and move
Yes.
on. Is that okay?
Yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yep, so item A. So you just hold it.
Hello, Chris Parks, Traffic Team Leader. So this is a report for Stourbank's Residents Parking Scheme. It's a report to consider the submissions following the advert of the TRO. There were effectively 3 submissions, 2 from the same property and 1 from a separate property. So the submissions have our response on there. Would you like me to run through them? Yeah. So the first submission objection was supporting the scheme but objecting to the operating times. They wanted the 24 hours rather than the proposed times. So the scheme was advertised in a similar vein to the way that Dorset had originally advertised it. We just carried on the original proposal, and that proposal was for a scheme that didn't run 24/7. If we wanted to change that, then we'd have to re-advertise it. The second objection was stating that they had off-street parking. The residents with off-street parking don't need to buy a permit. The resident is also eligible for visitor permits as well. So the recommendation is that, considering those submissions we had and our responses to it, that we progress the scheme as it was advertised.
Okay, thank you. This is these are two parallel roads that run down to Twynham School in Christchurch, and I think the real problem is actually the sixth formers driving to the school, and they don't have anywhere on site for them, so they all fill up these streets and create a problem. I don't know if anyone has any. Willing to speak to this item, Councillor Trent.
Well, I don't know if someone from Christchurch wants to speak first, because
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The residents of these two roads warmly welcome restrictions which will actually give them as residents the ability to come and go to their properties. Secondly, to see their cars are not repeatedly damaged, which has been a common occurrence because of the congestion in these particular roads. And further, having seen at Twynham School that they have created an additional off-road parking area within the grounds, I see that there is no reason that the people going to and fro from the school do not use alternative locations. Christchurch fortunately does have other parking areas, and it has been a continual problem for a long time, and this regulation order is extremely welcome after much delay, I must say, that it will actually move forward. I think it will be a very welcome change to the setup for parking, and the ward councillors for the whole of Christchurch are behind seeing this brought forward as soon as practical.
Thank you. Councillor Trent, will you?
yeah, I've actually had, although not as much as areas like Pooltown Central, the area off Ashley Road, but I had quite a bit of experience of residents' parking schemes, and because there's one basically around the industrial estate on the sort of nearest part of the ward, and it's one that happened in two phases, and people were saying, oh, we want it extended, etc. But, literally did a voting consultation, and I think the third one, which we abandoned, came out 50-50, it wasn't overwhelming. But there seemed to be some mention of issues over the timing of it. The one that was introduced in Oldley was time limited. It was Monday to Friday, I think, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Whether or not this ought to be Monday to Saturday, but it was a standard residence parking timings, so to speak, and it actually works well. And in the evening, which is when you're most likely to get visitors and so on, because you could actually have an issue where, if you had more than the one visitor that you've got a permit for, you could get into difficulty. So actually making it limited to the part of the day where the problem is the greatest, which is usually the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. period, does make sense. And from personal experience, it works very well, and the residents are very happy with that arrangement.
Sorry, Chris, could you just advise what is the time limit on this one? Sorry. On the map. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Yeah. So in this case, it particularly is about the school more than anything. I think it is people going to the school.
That was recommendation.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay, lovely. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're aware, and I think we share the view that residence parking schemes are difficult, and fundamentally everyone wants a residence parking scheme where they're a resident, and they don't want one anywhere else. And I do slightly take issue with the idea that anyone should be effectively entitled to the car parking space outside their house, which is so often the case. Now, I do recognise that in this case there are further difficulties, particularly caused by the school. But I would also suggest that probably the biggest thing which has caused a problem here is the residence parking or the controlled parking zone on Riverley Road. In fact, looking at I don't know those roads. I had a look on sort of Google Maps, etc., just on Street View, and I can see that on this particular on Stowbank Road, it does look as though one side of the road has off-street parking, one side doesn't. Whereas on Riverley Road, everyone seems to have off-street parking, and it seems to me that had Riverley Road not had a residence parking zone, we wouldn't get the call for this one here. And my question, I guess, is where's the next place that this is going to push people's parking to? Because the big problem with residence parking zones is they spread like a cancer. As soon as one road has them, they are that parking is displaced to the next road. So that one asks for one, and so on and so on and so on. So in this case, is there a place for it to be displaced to? Does that mean we are likely to get further demands, or you are likely to get further demands over the next years?
So I didn't express an interest, but my parents used to live in Douglas Road, which is directly opposite these, and in Kings Road. So I know that those two roads will suffer as a result. And as you say, actually, Stowbank Road probably has more than Riversley Road. I'm going to go to the officer and then I'll come to you, Nigel, if that's okay. Richard.
Yeah, something that this can turn on. Wonderful touchscreen. Come on. I've broken it. There you go. What I would just say in this particular instance is that both of these roads, both Stowbank and Riverley, do lead directly down into the school itself. So I think there maybe not be highlighted, but I think there would be benefit, particularly for mode shift, of people walking through a pleasant environment to a school. So that is in an environment where you're not going to have cars coming down, parking and searching and hunting for spaces. And at the end of Stowbank in particular, there's a huge cycle rack. So actually there's benefit there in terms of it's actually quite a quiet road if you do introduce restrictions in that road. So there is that sort of benefit that may not have been fully highlighted in the original report.
Councillor Brooke.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. As I mentioned earlier, an additional parking area has been created within the school grounds, albeit it's a gravel surface, but it's also controlled by a barrier and an entry code. There is adequate space for those who may then have to pay a small fee, who may be sixth formers or others, to park in that area. This will encourage the school to actually use that effectively by taking vehicles off a residential road.
Thank you. Yes, I did actually write to the headmaster because I was concerned about the fact, and he was sort of, well, not boasting, but he was pleased that he's attracting students from all over the conurbation to that area, and we have problems with two other schools in a very similar light. But I'm interested. I didn't know about that new, but that is available to sixth form students.
Chair, I think it is primarily for teaching and support staff, but there is adequate room with a gravel surface to take more vehicles off surrounding roads without too much investment.
I can feel another letter coming on. I saw Councillor Farquhar then. Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two quick questions to the officer. Great response. My question is that there's no indication whether or not the letter had an idea of the cost and the increasing costs of the actual permit scheme itself to the residents. That prompted the response which you have. My second question then is based upon one of the responses, and as Councillor Green points out, that only one side has the opportunity for off-road parking, is that has a consideration been given to the fact that more hard standing in front of properties adding to fluvial flooding might well occur because people are not prepared to pay their permit fee because they have off-road parking and they can get that area for free. So two questions. One, are the customers aware, e.g. the residents of this road, of how much it is? And can you inform us of that? And the second one is, what consideration has been given to encouraging fluvial flooding? Because in the road I live in, as soon as you start charging, you move off-road.
yes, the residents are made aware of the fact that the permits cost money and that there is a risk that that could increase over the years. With regard to the changes of the front drives, garden areas, I would like to highlight that if a resident can't find a parking space, then they would also be inclined to change their front parking over to a parking space, front garden frontage of the house over to parking to ensure that they get a parking space. With the residents parking scheme, it does allow them a chance of a parking space within the road, and that would hopefully reduce the demand of the frontages being changed.
Just to add to that, looking at the frontages on that particular road, there's little to zero chance they'd actually be able to fit a parking space in front of their houses. They're very much, I would say, half a metre behind the highway, so you're not going to get even a very small smart car within that space legally.
But you would fit a bike. Sorry, Richard, then I'm going to come to Councillor Green.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. My name is Richard Pearson. I'm the Transport Network Manager. I just wanted to make one other observation, that this is a legacy request that has come through from Dorset County Council, as was, and got very close to being approved by the council, sort of fell at the 11th hour, and then residents have expressed huge disappointment because of that, and it's had to restart the process from scratch within the BCP jurisdiction. We are sort of talking about policy around residents' parking permits, and of course different people around the table will certainly have their views on that. What we would hope to do at a future tag is to bring a bit of a ranking and prioritisation, or let's say policy paper forward, so that the matters that sort of more generally pertain to how we approach this as a council can be considered in isolation, rather than sort of focusing them all on this legacy request that we've got before us today. It's just an observation that may be worth considering.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. And I suppose part of that is, you know, this committee exists to advise Cabinet and to give us that temperature. I think the other thing that's really important there is this is right outside of school, and I know she hasn't asked to speak yet, but Councillor Rice is very keen on what we can do to improve, exactly as Richard, the other officer, said. The walking and cycling to school by improving the environment right outside the school. So that's really key. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, it's also very much about walking and cycling to school. I think I would be disappointed with any school that decided to start offering parking to their sixth formers, I have to say. And also, I'd be quite surprised if sixth formers would choose to pay for parking as opposed to clogging up the other roads around, as we would have in this place. And I do recognise, as Mr Pearson says, that this is a legacy scheme, but there are an awful lot of places around the new conurbation where there has been demand for daytime parking. I think particularly all around the university, going to Talbot Woods and into Wallistown. And the response there, although there's been many calls for residents' parking schemes, has been to impose 1 hour or 2 hour no parking in the day at the time that people would be at school or at university, to discourage it in that way, and that has worked well. Again, although it is a legacy scheme, and I understand that, I do fear that any granting of residence permits in one part of BCP will lead to a rush for or demand for them elsewhere. And while there may be a way of approaching it as a whole, the piecemeal approach, which we have to have at the moment, is, I think, storing up some problems.
Thank you for that. I was going to close it, but I got lots of interest. Richard, would you like to speak first?
Mine was just a follow-up to Richard's comments, which is essentially when Richard's referring to a tag paper coming in the future regarding parking matters, that would actually be an output of the strategic parking review that's been approved. So I just wanted to highlight that. So I see that obviously those items as they're progressed would be reported to TAG, just to be absolutely clear in that process. It wouldn't be a standalone separate item. It would be part of a strategic,
Thank you.
study.
I thought that's probably what he meant, but thank you for clarifying that. And I guess the difficulty is it's more difficult to take away a residence parking zone than it is to give one. Sorry, Councillor Bull, I haven't spoken.
Just two quick questions, thank you, Chair. One is do we know the cost of the park and ride scheme for the residents, what they will pay for their permits? And the second thing is more about the legacy application and why that fell, because I know the residents were quite disgruntled that it's been taken so much time. I'm not sure if this is the right forum to look at that, but what stopped it from going through when I was told it was just waiting for the paint to be put on the road,
So I don't know the full history of it, but I do know that there was a bereavement in the team in Christchurch, and it may be tied in with that, but it just ran out of time in terms of the reorganisation. So when Dorset County Council ceased to exist and Christchurch became part of BCP, it hadn't gone right through the process, is my understanding. I don't know if any officers want to comment on that. And also the cost of the permits for the residents.
The cost of the permits is £50.
Okay, thank you. And we haven't normalised that across the three authorities as yet. That'll be part of the parking review, I'm guessing. Councillor Farquhar, and then I think we really should move on to the next one.
Thank you, Chair. Based upon what we've heard as regards to strategic parking review, this legacy, and the fact that we haven't got standardisation, may I make a move that we actually recommend to Cabinet that this one is delayed until such time as that review comes back, and we can look at it as a wider picture for the conurbation rather than this legacy Dorset Council particular case.
Thank you. I've received quite a bit of correspondence. I'm sure the officers have received rather a lot more, but perhaps we'll take that away and consider it. But I think we might have to deal with this one in terms of it being there's a significant head of steam in the Christchurch area, I think, about this. So I'll take it away and perhaps reflect on that with Christchurch colleagues, if I may. Thank you. Thank you for that one. Shall we move on to B?
So this is a report for the consideration on the submissions for disabled bays for locations across Bournemouth. So this once again went through Cabinet for approval to advertise. The traffic order was advertised and we received a number of submissions objecting to the proposals. The first one was from a local councillor just objecting to the general objection to removal of disabled bays. That was so our recommendation, our response to that, is that the bays are listed. The removal bays, the bays that are no longer required, either the residents moved on or various reasons, and those bays are no longer required, so they are listed for removal. We also had an objection received due to the lack of parking directly outside the resident's property. At that point, we contacted the resident and spoke to them, and they have now got their application for their own disabled bay, and there is space on the highway for the 2 disabled bays, so that application is going through the process and will be considered in due course. The third objection was due to the lack of on-street parking. The actual bay in question, the applicant withdrew their request for it, so that objection no longer stands, as the bay is not going to be implemented at that location. Therefore, our recommendation is for the proposals to be confirmed, sealed and implemented.
Thank you. It's always difficult this because obviously we've got to respect the fact that when you are significantly, particularly physically impaired, then it can become an enormous issue. Councillor Trent.
Yes, Chair. I think there was some misunderstanding when I saw this advertised. I think some people probably thought of it as actually removing disabled bays on the end of, parking runs and so on, which it isn't. And I know at one time, I don't know what the current situation is, but I think residents had to pay towards the provision of a disabled bay, if they have the need outside their home. And if they no longer need it, removing it makes perfect sense. And, they're cropping up in other places. I've got a couple of EPDs in my patch, and, it's actually important for some residents to have somewhere to park close to their area, but if they, move on or they become more disabled and they become hospitalised or something like that, there comes a point when they no longer need it. So I don't see any problems at all with this, because it is just juggling around with need as and when it occurs or it ends. And but I would quite like an answer, because I don't know what the current situation is whether residents who apply for it do get charged and how much they get charged. Because I've had inquiries in the past, and I don't actually know what the current situation is.
I think they do get charged, and the charge includes the subsequent removal. So at the point when it goes in, is that correct? Yep.
Yeah, that is correct, yes.
Thank you, that's lovely. Okay, any other comments, questions on this one?
Sorry, Chair, it's the pressing one, the same as with the parking permits. How much is that charge to have a specific permit bay outside for a disabled property?
I need the councillors, sorry, the officer to tell me if that's possible.
A general disabled bay is £350. A permit disabled bay is £400.
So a permit would give them effectively exclusive access to that bay.
It would, yes.
And that, I don't think that applied. Certainly, I'm not sure. I wasn't aware of that in Poole. I think that we only had the former, the lower one. Did we?
That was correct. Yes.
It is. I mean, one of the issues, certainly in the centre of Poole Old Town, is that there's very limited space for any parking, and to have a permit space for disabled access, part of it was you couldn't guarantee that if there were other disabled people wanting to park, that they couldn't use it. If we go to giving people their own access, it comes back to Councillor Green's point about people effectively getting park the public highway individually, although obviously for disabled people that's more of an issue. Is that going to be part of the strategic review to look at how we handle that?
Say yes. Yes, it will be.
Most things will end up being that. It's going to be a huge review.
Yeah. May I just add that blue badge holders can sometimes find it difficult. These bays are provided outside their residence, and if a general disabled bay, any blue badge holder can use that bay. So they might return home to find that the bay is occupied by someone else, especially in locations of town centres, as highlighted. So a permit bay will allow them reassurance that when they return home, that they actually have a space close to their property.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that there are the non-visual disabilities that now are able to have a blue badge, so the numbers of people with blue badges is on the increase. Okay, any more questions on that one? Councillor Howell.
Yeah, I was just following up on that point, because I'm pretty sure we can't have those in Poole, those dedicated ones, because otherwise people would have asked for them, wouldn't they? I mean, is that part of, presumably going forward, now that we have that, anybody who knows about their existence will apply for that type of bay, and therefore most of the ones that will. What is that? Is there some kind of distinction between whether you apply one or the other? Because they'd always go for the gold-plated one, wouldn't they?
No, not always. We have found that some people go for the general bay. There is the question of cost. So it's slightly cheaper, but people generally go for the permit bays where they're finding very strong issues about parking, and it's generally a two-stage approach where they would apply for a disabled bay and then go for the permit bay if they then find that the general disabled bay is used by other blue badge holders. Sometimes the residents in particularly dense parking spaces do go straight for the permit bays. Yes.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, because one of the experiences we had in Poole Town was we got into a situation where somebody applied for one, and then lots of local people objected on the basis that they said that particular person wasn't sufficiently disabled enough, and they are going to be more popular and sought after, aren't they, if they if the person can get a dedicated bay, so potential for fraud there, and do we do some investigations to make sure that they're not trying to defraud the system?
There is a strict criteria which we require documents to be provided, and we check those documents as they're handed in. The question about abuse of the blue badge, if they have a blue badge and they can demonstrate, we see the site of that blue badge, then they have the blue badge. If they are using that blue badge fraudulently, then that would be a question for the enforcement team of Care Direct.
Okay.
So as long as the criteria is met, then we provide them.
And just in terms of the permit bay, so the more expensive one, is it the same level of disability? It's not for people who are more physically unable to travel distance.
No, the criteria is the same.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Just very briefly, my wife is wheelchair bound with multiple sclerosis, and so we do come across an awful lot of other people in a similar situation. I think it's important to consider the individual's needs, because a lot of people cannot manoeuvre very far between their home and their car, whereas, as you rightly mentioned, a number of people are quite able to go 50 yards, 20 yards to actually get to their car quite adequately. So I think a judgment does come to the individual who requests the requirement to have a permit for a bay.
Thank you. I think in considering, we've got to look to normalise this across the patch, and I think we do need to think about supporting those people who really can't go the distance, rather than having every blue badge holder able to spend an extra 50 quid and get the higher rate badge. Otherwise, we'll lock up all our parking.
Chairman, sorry, I wasn't speaking this, and I personally I feel that it's a good idea right at the beginning of TAG that we have these sort of general discussions, and obviously we'll do so more when we get to the strategic parking review. Although I would hope that as we go forward, that disabled bay proposals, particularly given that there is often a need for them to be introduced quickly, that we would be able to get a far more expedited route rather than having to come to TAG. But one of the things I think, Chris, that if I remember rightly, I think those fees must have changed, because when we approved a change about 3 or 4 years ago in Bournemouth, and there was then quite a differential in price between the general bay and the dedicated permanent bay. I had in my mind that it was 250 and 450, but I'm not sure when that changed. Is that definitely right, 300 and 400?
I believe so. I don't have those figures in front of me.
Our debate was very much there about actually we wanted to make sure that if people wanted a dedicated bay, then they needed to show a stronger will for it, and that meant paying quite a bit more than having the bay that others could use.
I think your point about I'll come to you in a minute. I think your point about the expediency for doing it quickly is an important one, because obviously if people are deteriorating or in difficulty, then you need to be able to support that. I think the issue about it just being around cost, though, is something about often these people don't have a lot of money anyway, so or if they can afford to run a car, then maybe they can afford the higher rate, but that may be another issue. Julian.
Yeah, anybody that owns a car is poor. So in terms of the expediency, yes, I think what we will do as officers will note, we've defined the scope through committee on the strategic car parking review, but we'll note, based on this debate, the need for us to work on both the form of it, but also the criteria that are set in terms of the thing. Some elements are actually defined by government, but there are ways that we can work through that. But it will form. I think the strategic review will be strategic, but it will have to deal with such detail as this. So it's something for the future for you to be.
Thank you. I think I'll close it there. Right, so item C, so this is Beresford Road.
Okay, Beresford Road is a narrow cul-de-sac, and residents raised concerns that it was becoming obstructed by vehicles and being overparked, as it were. And therefore we brought forward a proposal to put double yellow line restrictions there, or full-time waiting restrictions. We had 2 responses, so 2 identical letters, and as you can see there, the neighbours objected that the restrictions will displace parking into the main part of Beresford Road, causing congestion and bad feeling amongst residents. So our response was a proposal was prompted by residents asking their ward councillor to introduce measures to keep the cul-de-sac clear and prevent footway parking. So we would recommend that the restrictions are introduced because it seems quite unacceptable that the cul-de-sac is becoming blocked.
Thank you. It's fascinating doing this role because you get to all sorts of little nooks and crannies of the area, and just looking at the way in which those things are constructed, it wasn't for the car, was it? Any councillors? This is an Alderney one. I don't know if you've got anything in particular.
Well, it's Newtown, but
yeah.
you know, I accept that it's almost certainly needed.
Okay. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know the Clays. Does it need to be restricted on both sides, or because I don't know? It says that it's narrow, and I think actually the next one is also about the request for one way, but it doesn't say one side of the road. Yeah. But it doesn't say in the report whether it is for restrictions on one side or both.
It's all the way around. So there may be a little bit of confusion on the plan that was provided for this one. It's the one on the left-hand side. So the one in Beresford Close didn't receive any objections, so would simply go forward to be made and introduced. The one on the left, around the corner on Beresford Road, that you can see there, did receive these two objections, and that's why we've brought it back for further consideration. It is true that parking would be displaced inevitably, but on the other hand, if the Beresford Road cul-de-sac is blocked and people can't even use their cars, it would seem a bit self-defeating in regard to the use of the cul-de-sac.
It's also because of the circular nature of it, people getting on and off their drives, it's the turning space that gets blocked.
Sorry, my question was whether whether it needs to be restricted on both sides of the road, or whether on one side would be sufficient.
I beg your pardon. It's circular and of similar nature all the way round, and so really to effectively clear it, you would need to have restrictions all the way around. Yeah.
Just to add some clarity, it's about 4.5 metres wide, so it's very narrow. Yeah. Okay, so if there was a large vehicle parked in there, you'd have to mount the curb to get past it.
Was this not about the bin lorries getting through as well? Was that not part of this one?
That could be a factor. There are others coming up with that as a greater factor, actually. But of course, bin lorries, emergency vehicles, and possibly care vehicles, if it's blocked, though all of those vehicles would struggle to access this as well. Although that wasn't the sort of the original reason explicitly for the request. That is also true.
Okay, lovely. Anyone else want to speak on that one? Thank you. Let's move on to D.
D is fairly similar, actually. It's Alipore Close this time. And we had requests from a resident who'd experienced problems with missed collection of their refuse. And we confirmed with the refuse collection team that they were in fact having problems. They cannot get often their larger vehicles down. They do operate some smaller vehicles for this sort of exact reason, but the smaller vehicles are sort of fewer and far between. They cost more money, and because they're small, they have to keep going back to empty their loads, as it were, and so the reliability of the refuse collection service becomes quite questionable. And of course, as we mentioned with the previous one, if the refuse vehicle can't get down, then we don't believe that the emergency service vehicles or other vehicles would easily get down there either. And therefore, the recommendation is to introduce parking restrictions on both sides that go out and also clear the Bellmouth entry into Alipore Close.
Thank you. This one's interesting because I guess there's two big buildings at the top of the close that I guess are flats with multiple occupancy, and it's on Street View. It's parked all the way up on one side, so clearly the residents do make heavy use of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I see Councillor Farquhar?
That's an interesting. Thank you, Chair. That's an interesting point which you raise. I mean, how many bins are at these four properties, which on the face of the plan are at the top? I mean, is it flats? I mean, how many residents are there? And my second part of the question, if I may, Chair, is the distance between Birchwood Road and the end of that close is how far?
Yeah.
They'll look. Obviously, I don't have the exact detail. I've obviously got access to Google here, which I've just looked at. There are substantially large properties at the end of it, which do look like there's going to be several. If certainly, I would estimate more than 10 flats at least. At the end, they're just on the scale of the building. In terms of the distance, if I can just do this quickly, boom.
It's around 30 metres, I would estimate.
It's about 70 metres actually. When you actually get up to the frontage, and again, perhaps for future transportation advisory groups, it may be beneficial if we could put things up on the screen, perhaps so you can actually see them just as a observation as an officer when you're discussing these types of matters. If it would help, I could do that now. But
I think that would be useful for future. Let's not worry about it now. Just looking at the plan, it actually says 1 to 5 on one of the buildings and 1 to 5
yeah.
across 2 of the buildings. So there are probably 15.
Thank you, Chair. Based upon that information, it seems to make perfect sense to get a full-size wagon up there to empty residents' bins rather than allow parking for the residents.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Green.
Chairman, I'd just point out that one of the things, if you can't get a full-size wagon up for bin collection, you can't get an emergency vehicle up there necessarily. So I think whenever we see something about refuse, whenever we see something about refuse vehicles being able to access, we should always think of it in the way that emergency vehicles would. Thank you.
Yes, and unusually they haven't got the pavement to park all over up here. Okay, lovely, thank you. We can move on to E then, please.
Okay, a similar theme, but this time in Doyne Road. So the scheme was prompted by a request from a resident to restrict parking to one side of the road, but because when vehicles are parked both sides of the road, the road becomes blocked. There were a few objections there. An email being received from 2 residents of a household on the road. They don't object as such, but they ask that the council introduces a residents' parking scheme in the road. The response there, the council cannot introduce more stringent restrictions than have been formally advertised, obviously without re-advertising the order. There are requests for resident parking schemes in many roads throughout the conurbation, as we've discussed at length, and there are no current plans to extend the controls in this particular area for perhaps what would be a smaller number in regard to this particular request. So obviously it's again about access and trying to maintain access down the route at least, but it's still allow in this case some parking, as a restriction would be introduced just on the one side.
Thank you. This one's interesting, and actually, as Councillor Green said, we're getting into some of this. So some of the comments on this one are probably the previous ones apply. Looking at the street view is helpful because the side that is proposed to be banned is the side that people haven't got off-road parking, but actually they don't, because the nature of the road, they're unlikely to be able to put them in their front garden. So there is something about effectively, although we put lines on one side, most of the others have drop curb. So it is actually probably eliminating the parking in this road. Does anyone want to speak on this one? Yes, Councillor Brooke.
Well, just looking at Street View, I can see that the head of the road has had double yellow line restrictions already in place. But clearly looking at the alignment of the road, it is far too narrow for emergency vehicles, and vehicles are currently parking on the pavement to allow anyone to access the road at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, just what was the decision about which side of the road should be restricted? Because there does seem to be a significant difference between the number of driveways on one side as opposed to the other.
I think it's the left as you go down, is that correct?
Yes, so as you drove in, it would be on the left.
Was there any calculation about the number of driveways?
I think there might be a bit more opportunity to actually park on the other side than there is. So if if it was put on the other side, it would wipe out all parking, whereas if it's put on that side, it's more likely to allow limited other parking rather than remove all parking. So I think that was the rationale behind that.
Thank you. And there were only two of the residents who felt there was a problem.
Yes, and it wasn't really an objection to this measure. Particularly, it was perhaps more of a request to consider varying the proposal to make it a residence parking scheme instead.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, it's a more general question, but there seems to be a good point to ask it. In roads in Bournemouth as opposed to roads in Poole, when you've got double yellow lines put down or single yellow lines or whatever, often the drive entrances are marked with a white bar, you know, a couple of lines and a thing. That doesn't seem to happen in Poole. I don't know what the situation is in Christchurch. It's one of those things you only notice it when it is an issue. But I'm wondering whether there is scope to standardise on that, because personally I think the idea of actually protecting drives with this extra marking is quite useful, because the number of times that when you're parking and you've got to think, oh, am I overhanging the drive and things like that, those lines do help, and it's, you know, it's something that Bournemouth seem to do in schemes in places like Winton and so on, that I think ought to perhaps be rolled out over the whole conurbation if there isn't an issue with it, because I know sometimes these signs are, in fact that even might be an advisory sign as opposed to a legally enforceable sign, but it does seem to help when you've got an area with dense parking, and it's just really throwing that in to be thought about.
I suppose my concern is we end up painting the whole road, and also confusion with cycle lanes. But Richard,
it might be. Thank you, Councillor Trent, Councillor Hadley. It may be helpful to explain that these are H-bar markings, or what we sometimes more poshly call access protection markings, and in Bournemouth World as was, any resident who had a dropped access to a driveway could ask for one of those, pay a fee. I think it's currently £130, I believe. 150. Inflation got added on since I last looked at it, and we would mark those. It's worth clarifying that a dropped access, if someone parks across that who hasn't been given permission by the owner, then our parking enforcement teams can in fact issue a ticket against that action. It is an offence already, irrespective of whether there's a white line there or not. So you're right to say that the white line is advisory, but of course it can help to highlight the access point, and where residents are struggling with people parking partly or fully across their entrances, it's something that some residents asked to be put in, and it's another tool in the box really of trying to manage the streets effectively for the residents. They are now. Sorry, I was going to say that at the start. Lost my train there a bit. They are available now across our whole of BCP, but that's relatively recent for Poole and I believe Christchurch as well. But it's something that now we would say to any resident they're allowed to ask for. It doesn't change the legal position in regard to the entrance. It merely serves to highlight it.
Try a different finger.
Yeah, which actually brings up another element. You mentioned about drop curbs. There are a number of roads where a drop curb seems to extend along basically where there's a fence and there's no vehicle access and so on. And, you know, I do wonder why that is the case. You know, I can think of a lot of roads where there seems to be drop curb that doesn't seem to relate to any entrance and so on, and I wonder what's actually done to regularise that. And
well, there's an interesting point, Councillor Trent. So there can be many reasons for that. historically, some highway authorities have found it cheaper, more effective, if you like, to overlay their roads rather than to plane out material and then put back that material when the roads are resurfaced. When that happens, there is a loss of curb face, which may be deemed or may historically have been deemed to be acceptable. In other cases, the road was poorly constructed in the first place and they didn't allow a significant curb face at all. And in other cases, there are sections that have been dropped where there were accesses previously, and then following development, those curbs haven't been amended. I would regard that as unfortunate, because when a development like that takes place, we should place a requirement through the planning process on the developer to bring those curbs up to full height where that's appropriate. So there's a variety of reasons why that can happen. Occasionally, due to regular vehicle incursion onto the footway, the curbs, if they're not being very well constructed in the first place, can actually be pushed down by the vehicles and start to be more level with the road itself. But I would say that latter example is probably the rarest of all reasons.
If I may, I would just add, Chair, that where we have capital improvement schemes, so most recently when we basically delivered the Challenge Fund programme, which was mainly pool-centric, where we came across that situation on several of those routes, we actually reinstated full-height curbs. But obviously, unless we're going through an area and actually undertaking structural maintenance, unfortunately, relative to other priorities across the whole of the conurbation, they're not really deemed a priority.
So at the point when the road's getting completely resurfaced, then that sort of thing will get sorted out, but it's a very rare occurrence. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else for that one? No, thank you. We move on to the next one then, please.
Okay, this so report F is in regard to a disabled bay in Dunford Road, and the resident who applied for and uses the disabled bay that was previously in place in Dunford Road has asked for it to be relocated to a more convenient location. You can perhaps see the plan there, so it's moving it a distance down the road, and there were some objections, so 2 objections from residents of a household on the road. They objected on the grounds that parking is already in short supply in their road, and this will make it difficult to park near their home. The new location is further from the Blue Badger's home, out of sight of her home, and located uphill from her home. And their final point was the new location is a place where vehicles have sustained damage from passing traffic or pedestrians and is on a slight curve. So our response has been that these are all points that the Blue Badge holder has already considered before making the application. And she would have to walk uphill to get to or from either bay. So we'd recommend that the bay is moved for the better convenience of the Blue Badge holder in this case.
It is, I assume, that they're having to pay for a new bay effectively as part of this process.
I believe that's true. Yes, I believe that's true.
Councillor Farquhar.
Saying it, Chair. It's more of a note of caution, particularly with requests like this. I've got a slight anecdotal story, but prior to me getting elected, when I was knocking the doors, I spoke to a resident who didn't have a disabled bay, was reluctant to get a disabled bay due to pressure from neighbours, and had rigged up some sort of drop curb, and financial bits and pieces came into the equation. The reason I say it's a note of caution is because after I was elected, that same resident's disabled vehicle had a brick through its windscreen, which I reported to the police on their behalf. And that resident was pretty much housebound, and I've not had the opportunity to see them or have them answer the door again. So for me as a councillor now, and safeguarding, requests like this and residents identifying an individual that uses that bay and where they live in relation to the bay raises alarm bells in my safeguarding mind, and it's just a note of caution which I'd like to just have considered by the tag group here, is that I can understand totally the recommendation to fulfil the requirement of the resident that has the blue badge, but I've seen in my own ward, before it became my own ward, intimidation for people that have a disabled bay, particularly when I see this one here that says we're going to lose a parking space, where in reality there's not, it's simply a move. No. So my question, if there was one, is there any further steps that the officers look at that, or have they encountered something similar in their experience before? This was in Bournemouth.
It did. I thank you, Councillor Farquhar. It did have slight overtones, didn't it, of a sort of resident dispute to it. Forgive me, I'm not fully appraised of the background to the request. I'm standing in for another colleague who might have said more. I didn't really want to give the number of the resident or the name of the resident at this meeting because I didn't think it was appropriate. But the bays are roughly equidistant from their property in actual fact, and as you pointed out, this move would not represent a loss of parking in actual fact. It might feel like a loss of parking to the individuals in the location to where the bay has been moved, but there isn't actually a net difference to the parking. I don't know, Chris, if you had previous, so you wouldn't know about this one particularly, but
no, there is a risk. Yes, agreed that there is a risk that parking is a very emotive issue, and if a space is allocated to someone, then there is a risk that people will react negatively to that. Unfortunately, well, when the bay is provided, of course, it wouldn't take a detective or anybody very long to work out who is using that bay, whether it's a general bay or permit bay. So unfortunately, we can withhold the details in discussions like this and through the advertising process, but ultimately when the bay is provided, that resident, it could be open to that kind of abuse, and I am aware of people saying similar.
As you say, it gets way too emotive, and ultimately it is public space that we are dedicating or allocating in a particular way based on the balance of how we think we should approach it. Councillor Green, sorry. Councillor Brooks.
Well, Street View is very helpful in seeing that the road on one side has double yellow lines for its full length, and it's already been designated 20-mile-an-hour limit, so I think there must have been historical issues with this particular road. The relocation is outside some semi-detached properties who have off-road parking for at least 3 or 4 cars. So I wouldn't think there should be an issue with the particular adjoining residents that this was a reasonable relocation.
Can I just add?
Yes, I do. And then that's right. Yeah.
Just to add to that description, but on the opposite side, where the double yellows are, there's a drop curb with a nicely gravelled patch for people to turn into. The relocation spot is actually an unmarked spot. It's already marked up as here, Andy. Mm-hmm. But I foresee that there might be difficulties or tensions, and possibly that's why the objections are coming in for people turning into their off-road as well.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one. Whereas the previous, the current positioning is further down the road. It seems to be twice as long as the car itself, but actually on a reasonably straight angle. So.
Okay, thank you for
just
that.
To clarify.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yep. Councillor Rice.
Something a bit separate, but related. The pavements are just very. The pavements are very, very narrow on this road, and just in terms of the disabled access from the house to the car, looks interesting. black wheelie bin fills up the pavement in this photograph. So yeah, just noting it.
Yeah, particularly on that side where the W yellow lines are not. It's very narrow, isn't it? Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Howell.
Yeah, this is just a general point, just a learning point, really. It's quite a narrow road anyway, so I take it that the drawing isn't quite correct, and actually the emergency vehicles can get through the whole road, because judging by that, how that parking space is drawn, well, it suggests there's not enough room for wide vehicles. But I'm just interested in when there is a road that has issues with width, are we dependent on the emergency services or residents pointing that out to us, and then we make a judgment on it, or do we proactively try and address these narrow roads? Because I imagine there's quite a few out there that haven't been restricted.
So this is up at Parkston, and a lot of it has been traffic calm because it was used as through routes by people, and they're really unsuitable roads for that. There has been previously a traffic panel in the pool area, and I'm not sure the arrangements in Bournemouth, but I know that we had an issue in Queen's Park where we invited the fire service to send a fire engine along to see whether Queen's Park Avenue, I think it was, Queen's Park Avenue West, which they'd said yes, it's a problem on match days, particularly about football days. So I think we work with them, and we'd respond to either the emergency service, or in that case, it's members of the public who were saying, we don't think a fire engine could get along here on match days. Can you put a restriction in, please? And we sent the fire engine, or we invited the fire engine to go along, and it did, and they did say, yes, we can see it's a problem, Julian, and then...
Just going down the road a bit on Street View, it's clear that we've put in double yellow lines on both sides as the road narrows further. On Street View, it seems that it's an estimate, but with the parking bays that are actually marked, there is sufficient room for an emergency vehicle. But obviously, as the road narrows as it goes up the hill, we've got double yellows for that very reason, to allow for that passage rather than vehicles being hit or parking there. So, but what I would say is that a vast majority of people have already got drop curbs and put down their rights to have their off-road instead of a garden. So I think it's controlled. I think it may be that the scale for on the plan that's done is too large for the parking bays. It looks as though emergency can get through.
I think Richard's suggestion that we all look at the same image in the street view at some of these things would be useful for the future. Yes. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, I think the road, and it's one that I've used several times for sort of basically going round the block there. I think it is wide enough as it is, with restrictions on one side for emergency vehicles to get through. I do share the fears as to why the disabled resident is seemingly quite happy to move a parking space down the hill from where they are, because that does make me sort of think, is there a little bit of coercion going on? But I don't actually see any problem. It's taking something which exists and just moving it slightly. Although in an ideal situation, someone would be perhaps asking nicely, why are you doing this? Is it actually making matters worse for you? And why are you, going down there rather than, it's almost as if someone wants to knock the door and say, what is going on? Why are you doing that? But as far as the road is concerned, I think the current arrangements do work. It is narrow. It's a road you don't want to meet a vehicle coming the other way going up, and it also sticks in my mind quite a lot. And I'm sure there might still be a mark in the road, but several years ago I had an exhaust collapse going up the hill, and which sort of fell apart and dug into the road, and for years I could admire the wound that was left in the road.
The bill will be in the post. Any more for any more? I think we could move on if we can. Okay, so can we move on to the next one then, please? So G.
So yeah, Report G. This is a report for consideration to advertise the listed locations across various locations. This is for general traffic orders, as indicated on the Appendix 1. So the recommendation is for this to be considered for approval to advertise.
Thank you. And I do note that under item 16, there's Wolverley Road, which was particularly one that I think is another legacy issue in Christchurch around access to the tip, and alongside Lidl, which has been a bone of contention. Again, one that's good to see that coming through. Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. You've sort of inadvertently answered one of my questions, because the Wolverley Road one, it doesn't actually say, that there's nothing in the comment to say why you would be seeking the change in this report.
Okay.
So that's fine. I just think that in these reports it should always say why it does. Similarly, 6 and 8, where it's reinstating a restriction following an informal public consultation. Now, once again, we're in the stage that very often when people have lots of off-street parking, they very much like to have the idea of having no one being able to park outside their house. But people don't own the bit outside their house. And so I just wonder on 6 and 8, is there a good reason for it? Or is it just, well, we had it, we took it away, and people don't like it?
So I think this is adjacent to a parade of shops,
yeah.
if I'm right.
Sorry, it's Farm Road.
No, it's very close to the seafront down in Southbourne, and the seasonal restrictions stop the holidaymakers parking in these roads, causing congestion and other parking issues to the residents. The seasonal restriction was removed previously. The removal was requested by a number of residents in the road. It was then, once the restriction was removed, a different number of residents requested it to be put back in. Upon receiving that, we a letter dropped to all the residents to find the residents' desires and wishes and concerns, and then we acted upon that, which is the outcome here, which is reinstatement of the restrictions.
So can you just give an idea of how long ago did we take the restrictions away? Are we playing a bit of ping pong here?
I don't have those details, but it's a couple of years ago. The traffic order process is a long one, so that must have been at least 2 to 3 years ago. And then as soon as we had responses from the residents requesting the restrictions to be reinstated, we then started to investigate.
Okay, so I'll come to you,
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's sort of my point, that actually it isn't necessarily just what the residents want in that particular road. You know, you are here to look after residents in the whole of BCP. And if that, for example, would lead to displacement parking, if it's for people that are using the beach, then one person's gain very often is another person's problem. And I wonder, it sort of goes on to the next thing that I wanted to say, because there's a number again also in East Southbourne and then in Queen's Park as well, where we're looking at 10 metres of double yellows around a junction, and that is best practice to go 10 metres, and we've had this discussion many times, but there are also areas that are quite overparked, where there is a balance to be sought between whether you can afford to take that, if you take that 10 metres out and you then have more parking stress and people parking, it leads to people parking across drives more, it leads to all sorts of things. And so I wonder whether on this, and particularly in Queen's Park ward, where Cecil Hill, and yes, I know the road well and I understand it, but you're taking out a chunk of parking when at the other end of that road it's quite difficult for anyone to park. And I just wonder whether before it comes to this sort of report, whether it's to TAG, whether it's direct to Andy or whatever it is, whether it should go to the ward councillors for their comment, because it may be that before it goes to advert, in many of these cases, the portfolio holder has the opportunity to say, well, actually, no, I don't want that going to advert. And having spoken to the ward councillors, that may be the case, because again, just balancing it up with the wishes of particular residents there, with all other road users. I'll just it's unrelated, but if I can just mention it, I don't know, it does come very much into the into this issue, but I think it's on 19 and 20. I know one's just a correction of an error, but the ward councillors previously in Kinston South were very much involved in requesting these and trying to get them right with the balance to encourage the shops, but not to push the parking around the corner. Particularly, I think it was the garage around the corner that was causing some problems. So again, I just ask that some discussions take place with the ward councillors before a decision is made on whether to advertise these or not.
So partly again, we're trying to pull together the process we've had in three councils. I'm not sure we got that quite final. So there is something about how, and it's something I asked Julian the other day, is in terms of how we can streamline the Tiros. So we're doing a catch up on things that have been sort of in abeyance, particularly in the Dorset patch and in Christchurch, but also we need to make it slicker. Can you just comment in terms of whether ward councillors have been involved in all of these, or is that something that we need to think about?
The ward councillors haven't been, sorry, lost for words.
Consulted.
Consulted, thank you very much.
Okay,
no,
thank you.
Haven't.
Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Nick Geary and myself as ward councillors for item 13, Seaton Close, some legacy, we believe, with regard to bringing forward the request which is made clear in the final column of number 13. We're pleased that that is being brought forward, and we hope expedited. Number 16 was mentioned, Wiverley Road. Adjoining this road was a new retail park, the Meteor Retail Park, including an Aldi, a Mataland, and lots of other retail units. In the adjoining roads, which is the main Somerford Road running into Christchurch, on that road, traffic signals for pedestrian crossing were introduced, and also two other adjoining roads. The upshot of all this has been a lot of residents, shoppers going to the Meteor Retail Park and not parking in the designated area, free parking, but parking on the road because of the access problems that they have getting to and from the retail park. Also, the road is heavily used by commercial vehicles going not only to Dorset County's recycling centre, but also to a number of industrial units, and those vehicles have great difficulty getting along this road when a lot of visitors, residents, shoppers are parking along the road. So I think we fully endorse, from our perspective, that there should be better restrictions on this particular road.
Thank you, Chair. It was one of the ward councillors who was chasing it with me personally as to where it got to, so that's part of why it's come forward. I guess just to correct you, I think the tip is now probably hours to run rather than Dorset Council. It was Dorset Council previously. I'm going to come to... Sorry, yeah.
I would like clarification, because we still believe it is Dorset who are running it.
Okay. They may be running it on our behalf. We'll work that one through. Was it specifically about this topic? Because I was going to come to Councillor Rice, but if it's on that one, do you want to speak on it?
I was going to talk to item 13.
Okay, can I come to Councillor Rice and come back to you?
It was just about the pros and cons of restrictions on roads, and I suppose one of the benefits that I can see is around encouraging modal shift. So if it's more difficult to park near the beach, then it has some benefit in terms of encouraging people to use alternative sustainable transport to get to the beach if there's less parking that's available. So just a pro, I suppose.
Yes, thank you. On that, and again, my brother lives in Wilden Road, and that's the closest you can get to Hainsbury Head. So people park in his road and take their bikes at the back of the car and cycle down to Hainsbury Head. So it doesn't always, just again, it's back to this displacement thing. It doesn't always work. Councillor Geary.
Thank you, Chair. just to clarify, a statement was just made by the officer about the lack of involvement of a member in that particular item. I had with the highways officer and the residents a meeting concerning this item, and it was agreed that the officer would put forward the request for a TRO.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. I think it was the general point that across all of these had the Ward Council been consulted in every case, and I think the answer was not always. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Trent.
Yeah. Regarding item 2 on this list, the Broadway, the pay by phone parking, where at the moment there's fairly fast moving parking, I hope that the idea of it being pay by phone is reconsidered, because there are certainly a lot of people, and it's myself included, that don't go around with a smartphone and apps on it and God knows what. And visitors, for certain, because I know there are different systems and so on, I think if there is to be paid parking on there, and I've got mixed feelings about that, but I think, probably on balance, it would be perfectly reasonable. But I think it should give an opportunity for people to use cash and not just pay by phone. And so whilst I don't think there's a problem with meters being there, I think there should be at least an area where people who haven't got the appropriate phone app can actually pay by cash. Certainly in other areas where there is a pay by phone option, the cash option does still exist. I'm thinking of places like Leap Seaside Park and various other places, Wimborne as a whole, where the cash option is still there. And I would very, very much hope that that isn't entirely pay by phone, and that it does give an opportunity for people who at the moment will park, take their chances and park there because they don't want to go in the car park and so on, to at least park using coins.
Okay, that comes back to our strategic parking review, I'm sure. But actually, I think that end has, at various times, I think it has been paid parking before that end of the road, because it is right by the main car park. I don't know whether the car park itself is only paid by phone now, Hainsbury Head car park, or whether that's a mix.
Yeah, I think Hainsbury Head is pay by phone, but I think there's a lot of stuff that isn't covered by a meter, but it is really making the point that it would be helpful and fair and reasonable on, because not everybody has the same sort of access to technology or the same desire to get involved in it, to actually have at least an area where you can, take a couple of pound coins out of your pocket and put it in the meter for an hour or so. So
again, given this is our first meeting, and this is an area where Bournemouth had taken strides to take away the pay by cash. There are significant issues about people getting assaulted as they're emptying the cash machines, and about vandalism of the cash machines, and significant costs involved in that. We will need to think about that across the whole patch, and it does include does include the opportunity to ring and pay if you've got a debit card. But that still is excluding people who only live in the cash world. The question is for how long do we need to give that option, or is it for certain car parks, or could there be a way, for instance, there that they could pay in the shop or something like that? I suppose that is for us to look at how can we give people chances to continue to have alternatives without making it really difficult, really expensive for us to administer. That's the challenge. I think Councillor Green's nodding because I know he went through all the pain previously in the Bournemouth area, and we recognise that's a difficult area.
Can I make a suggestion? And it's something that I've used in other places, and certainly when when I visited my grandchildren abroad a little while ago, there was the ability to, and it was done in local shops, to have a preloaded card, pay your £10 or whatever it is, and if you're a holiday maker, it's an obvious thing to do, and you've got a card, and they do it for bus fare and everything else, sort of rail fare. It's quite a universal system, but to actually have a prepaid card that you just go in, if cash is a definite no-no, then I think there needs to be an option which at least people can use as an alternative to cash. And the idea of a prepaid card, a bit like you've got the Oyster card in London on the bus, although that's slightly different.
Okay.
But there are plenty of ways of doing it, and it would be a way of, if you wanted to remove cash from them, then it gives an opportunity for people without having to depend too much on technology.
Okay, certainly recognise the problem. This is particularly about high-sided vehicles not being able to get in the car park, so it's giving them somewhere to park down at the end of Amesbury Head. And I think that what you're asking about is actually a much more general thing we need to deal with in a more general way. Richard? Yes, Richard.
Just for clarity, you don't have to. Obviously, the TRO in question is about setting up a pay by phone section, but for the actual main Hengistbury Head car park, just for clarity, you can pay with debit or credit card. So I take your point that you can't use cash, but obviously in order to get cash out, generally you have to withdraw it using a debit or credit card. So you don't have to use a mobile phone to pay to park at Hengistbury Head if you go into the actual car park. The idea of introducing this along the Broadway is that it's actually a very inexpensive way of introducing charging without obviously incurring costs for cash collection. And again, this will be covered as a wider sort of review as part of the strategic parking review. Similarly, there's other benefits obviously in terms of climate change, because you haven't got vans driving around collecting cash. It's just a transaction that's going direct to a bank account. And again, as I say, I'm going probably a bit too far with this, but it will all be covered as part of the magical strategic parking review.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Brooks.
Just a very brief point. At Highcliffe Castle, there are varying rates through the year, and a number of visitors parking into the winter rate period were finding that the ring and go charging system was charging them for summer rates, and they could only realise that when they saw that going out of their account. So I think it's a technical issue, but it needs actually to be validated that it's actually set up correctly for charging relative to periods.
Yes, and the other one of those, of course, is Christmas, that we needed enough notice to be able to reconfigure all the parking meters, and again, how we do that in a more intelligent way as we go forwards. Okay, I think we'll call that course. I mean, part of this course is that these are going out to adverts, so the public will get a chance to look at this, and then it'll come back to us to see anyway, so we'll be able to repeat some of this debate down the line. Yes, if there are objections, thank you. Lovely, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one. Item H.
Sorry, Chairman.
Yes.
Sorry, if I may, I think that's sort of one of the points that I was making at an informal meeting. That you say it would only come back here if it has objections. There's therefore the mindset that they're going to go forward, and I again would look at so many a number of these and say, well, actually, is it in the public interest that it goes forward, or is it just something that has been requested by one or two residents for their own personal benefit and isn't in the public benefit? And that's why I feel that they should be going certainly to the cabinet member for a decision as to whether he wants them to progress to advert, and maybe even ahead of it coming to TAG.
Okay, thank you. As I said, we need to look at the TRO process overall, and part of that, those discussion, again, I've been having with Julian around delegation limits and delegations, and the TROs was the one area that I did actually say need to think about a little bit. So I hear what you say, and definitely accept the meaning behind it. It does come back to also what Councillor Rice was saying about the other uses for the road than parking that we need to think about. Yes, do.
Just to add a final comment, and it is being discussed in terms of delegations, and I'm quite keen as the director that we have something that's fit for purpose for the public, and that people see that that's transparent as well. So it's a balance, I think. But what I've taken from this meeting on that paper is the need for, at the moment we've got 3 sets of systems, and we're trying to move towards a strategic review to harmonise everything on parking, and we just need to make sure that ward councillors have a first viewing, I think.
Thank you, that's helpful. Item H.
So this is a report to seek to get approval to advertise some traffic orders for the implementation and removal, for the implementation of disabled parking bays. There is a removal on there as well. And the conversion of disabled bays from general disabled bays to permit bays. So the recommendation is to put this forward for advertisement in the TRO process.
Okay, thank you. This again, obviously we've had some of the discussions around disabled base previously. Does anyone want to speak on this one? No. Okay, thank you. It would be good to just clarify whether there's a cost to the resident for conversion from one to the other. So we said there's £50 extra to go for a permit holder's bay that's to a specific car. But if they're converting from one to the other, is that just they pay the difference, or what's the method for that?
There is a conversion fee, yes. I can't actually remember the figure at the moment. It's possibly about £150.
It's £200.
Okay, because there's other work involved in preparing it and advertising and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Thank you. That's great. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. So as I mentioned a bit earlier, item 8 has been deferred to our next meeting. We were originally asked to run that at our first meeting, but unfortunately one of the people involved is posted overseas, so couldn't be here. So item 9. Local transport plan.
So I'd just like to introduce Tim Forrester to you, who's going to present this paper.
Good evening all. I'm Tim Forrester. I'm the Capital Programme Manager, formerly based in kind of Poole. This is the first real BCP Council combined local transport plan, and so it's still, a lot of it's still in development in terms of the detail that sits underneath this. Again, I'm happy to go through this in whatever detail you would like me to. I'll run through kind of the core themes of what the report is about, and then obviously take any questions on some of the detail and some of the finances. Fortunately, it is very finance heavy. I appreciate it's one of the last items, so bear with me. Recommendations essentially is for approval, or recommend that Council approve the proposed 2020-21 local transport capital programme. That's set out in Appendix A, and I appreciate if you've got it in A4, that is absolutely tiny, so I do apologise for that. The second recommendation is the approval of the indicative 2021 to 22 all the way through to 23 3-year programme for the highways maintenance funding that we receive. So it's taken a lot of effort to put together a combined programme and to identify priorities for the whole of the BCP area. There's lots of work going on behind the scenes to determine which schemes are a priority and how we take those forward in the forthcoming year. There's also, this coming year and into future years, lots of additional financial implications that need to be considered as part of the local transport plan. And a few of those are identified, well, all of those are identified in the executive summary. Very, very briefly, and again, this is kind of determined within the background within the report. If you're not familiar, the local transport plan is a 15-year programme run in 3-year batches, and we're now on local transport plan 3. As Julian said, we're looking to refresh that and for local transport plan 4 in light of the work that's ongoing with SEDMs. So we're essentially halfway through the programme. The core objectives of the local transport plan for which we get funding are to reduce the need to travel, maintain and manage the existing network, active travel and greener travel choices, public transport alternatives to the car parking measures, travel safety measures, strategic infrastructure improvements. So this funding, core level of funding, comes from the Department of Transport, and it's through 2 particular streams. One is the integrated transport block, and the second is the highway maintenance funding. So if you turn to page 1 on the report, it breaks that down into the allocations for each of those particular strands. We also get a significant amount of funding currently, we're in the final year, from the Dorset LEP to the tune of just shy of 12 million to the final year of the programme, which is 2021 up to March 2021. We have £1 million worth of national productivity investment funding to be added towards Wallace Down Crossroads. We're also seeking approval for addition of developer contributions to the programme to deliver some of the schemes. And we are looking to get some approval for the local contributions that we've had to commit to for areas such as Transforming Cities Fund, Challenge Fund, etc., and support for various elements of the Challenge Fund bid. So the purpose of the local transport plan is essentially to set out the policy and the framework for what we want to deliver throughout the area. It's always been a combined programme, again, together with Dorset. And the idea is that we then determine the priorities within those core headings for the schemes that we feel are the best to deliver with the funding that we've got available. The financial implications, the legal implications and all the other specific implications that are relevant to this group are highlighted. And I suppose unless there's any other areas that you want me to particularly go into, it's more of a question of approving those things that are recommended.
Okay, lovely, thank you, Tim. And again, so this is a fairly high level, sits alongside and feeds into the Transforming Cities Fund bid, the high streets and the other bits, as you explained. So this is a big bit of the jigsaw,
yes.
And will spawn a number of schemes, a number of the essential maintenance pieces. So Councillor Trent first, we'll start there.
Yes, Chair. You've obviously got quite a few sort of headings there regarding Wallasdown Road, and I know it says £1 million for Wallasdown Crossroads. One of the issues there is whatever you do to Wallasdown Crossroads, it will still be a nightmare as long as you've got the rather manic sort of movements of vehicles on and off the shop forecourts, and you've got a bus that stops. This is immediately west of Wallasdown Crossroads. You've got a bus that hasn't got a pull-in or anything like that, and quite frankly, unless you tackle that area in front of the shops and come up with something that is less shambolic than what there is at the moment. And I know you've got lots of private frontages to deal with. Wallasdown Crossroads will always get blocked up. And I really think there needs to be a serious look at that, because otherwise you could spend a lot of money at improving the flow through, and you might possibly get better north-south flow, Alder Road to Kingston Road, by having traffic lights, for example, but you've always got that problem to the west of the crossroads because of the frontages, particularly on the south side of the road. The other point I really wanted to make was a slightly more minor point, but it's still quite important. There's a proposal, and I don't know whether that is what's actually included in the £1.5 million. There was a proposal to shrink the roundabout and provide a slightly different flow through it. This is the Boundary Road one now. The problem with that is one of the things that is going to be important over coming years, and is going to matter a lot to what we do, is trees. And you've actually got a situation at the moment where you have a roundabout that's got quite a good set of trees, and anything that shrinks that roundabout removes a lot of trees. And I'm actually worried that you could be creating a situation where we're trying to deal with a climate emergency, we're trying to plant more trees in more places, and then one of the first things we do is to remove one of the few roundabouts that's actually grown up a circle of quite good quality trees. And also want that thought about. But as I say, the biggest worry is the Wallasdown Crossroads. What on earth are you going to do that doesn't get sort of messed up by what's going on to the west of the crossroads?
Okay, so you've identified and outlined some of the issues that we face there, in terms of not only the shop frontages, in terms of the width, in terms of the roundabout. The boundary roundabout, we have already started or got commissioned the work to take some of those trees out as part of that roundabout, and the intention is that more trees will be planted in their place. But we are killing people at that roundabout. It's one of the real black spots of the area. In fact, that roundabout, the one next to it, the top of Glenferris Avenue, are a serious accident black spot. So there's something about how we balance all these priorities as we go forwards.
Just on that particular item, that is actually on the forward plan for the next meeting of TAG, the Boundary Road roundabouts. There will be a report on that particular scheme.
So I think
the next TAG.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I think part of that as well is, as part of the TCF fund, we are trying to include the Wallisdown Road in that. So and it's part of the juggling work that the officers do that I'm coming to appreciate more and more, in terms of trying to keep all these things flying and working in together to make to make sense of the network and improve along that bit. I don't know what plans we've got for the Wallisdown Crossroads yet. It's part of the work that will come before this committee to actually look at the detail and to study it and to work out how it's going to work. The bus companies really don't want to be put into bus laybys, because they then got all the traffic overtaking them and stopping in front of them, so it delays them further. So they really like to stay out of the traffic, but that creates queues behind them, as you suggested. It's a real balancing act. That's the whole conundrum of what we have to deal with, isn't it? Yes, absolutely.
And quite frankly, you have to go on a wing and a prayer if you actually want to get round that roundabout. Quite often, people are quite sensible. They'll leave a little tiny gap, and so you're actually breaking all the rules of a roundabout to get round. But people are kind of going along with it, so it is kind of managing itself in a shambolic sort of way. But you've always got this problem that to the west there is always congestion, and having vehicles coming in and out off the forecourts randomly all over the place. And unfortunately, there used to be a filling station there, which, if something had been done when that filling station was removed, it might have helped manage the situation a lot more. But at the moment, you've got a very heavily used area. I'm sort of wondering whether something like the toast rack in Broadstone could be looked at to see whether something like that could work there. But because I can understand from the traders' point of view, all hell break loose if they lose their parking. But that people pulling in and out with the way it exists at the moment is a lot of the problems. And I would hate to cycle along that little bit, because people are coming at you from every direction.
Yeah, it is very hazardous. I'll take the officer first, if I may, just assuming he's responding to that.
It was more about, really, this is the kind of high-level schemes that we're seeking funding to deliver. There's no question that these schemes will come back to this group when we've defined what the objectives are and what the forms of those schemes are. This is to secure the funding and the permission almost to carry on as part of the capital programme with the delivery and development of these schemes.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Councillor Green, I think, and then Councillor Brooke, and then Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. I'll ask them all together, if that's all right, on the integrated transport block schemes. The three questions. The Safer Routes to Schools shows next to it a TCF contribution of 100, which I presume is I don't know whether that means it's 125, is the local contribution towards TCF, plus there's a further 125 going in any case. Is that the case on that one?
Indeed, yeah.
Thank you. In which case we should probably put a TBC in the Transforming Cities Fund box on that one, as we have below. And actually there are a further 3 in the middle of that central block, and then the bottom 2 in the bottom block, where again it's showing the local contribution to TCF, but it's not showing that we potentially are going to be getting some TCF towards that. So I would have thought we should have TPC in all of those blocks. And my other question is just whether we can have a bit more detail on what the 185,000 for bus facilities is due to be. Are you happy to put TBC in those? Sorry, Chairman.
Yes, I am. Can I just explain kind of why there are TBCs in the final ones? The ones where there's TBCs are the ones that we're looking for funding from DFT from. The other ones where there are values applied are the local contributions to the TCF fund. So we've confirmed that within the programme we can fund those ones, whereas we don't know the value of the ask yet from DFT. But yes, we can confirm that they are to be confirmed.
Yeah, so I think that's important. If we've got them in for some of them, we're saying there is a local contribution in there, or there is no local contribution, as we've got on the lower section of it. We still should be, for consistency, showing that we are expecting and hoping that there will be some funds coming in from TCF for that.
So I think that's might be a misunderstanding. Effectively, Department of Transport, part of the negotiation, they were very keen on physical infrastructure that they could do. They weren't keen on enabling steps or on things like apps for travel, or on working with schools, that sort of thing. So the sum there is our contribution to the overall TCF, and the column is the money we're trying to get from the TCF from government. That's correct?
Exactly right.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I thought this was our local contribution, with expecting more to come in from TCF for these ones. No?
No, so there will be a core allocation from the Department for Transport. Based on the ask, we've assumed a local contribution that provides an equivalent percentage to that, and we've used schemes that we're planning to deliver in the 2020-21 financial year as our local contribution to the TCF. And so we are planning to deliver those schemes in any way, but we can use them as our contribution towards the TCF fund.
So just to be clear, the 250,000 we're spending, half of that we think are things that we can put a label to say this is part of our TCF contribution. So we're not actually after money from the centre for it. We're using half of the sum.
What it's indicating essentially is that if the committee was minded to advise to you that some of these allocations need to change, we would not recommend changing those allocations, because that would actually undermine our strategic bid for transforming cities funding.
Thank you. That's understood. I was just wanted to ask on that. Just to say, I would not be minded to recommend any changes to this. I think it's balanced, as I would hope. The bus facilities, though, what are we talking about with that for 185,000?
It's primarily new shelters. Primarily new shelters, new facilities, real-time information. And the priority for the forthcoming year has been identified as a number of key sites in Christchurch, given that the bus infrastructure has been significantly underfunded. And
so does that include things like real-time departure displays and things, tying them into our system so that the Christchurch residents will get benefit of those?
Yeah. So that was why I was wondering, but the item 2 below it is talking about, again, our local contribution, but for exactly that, for the bus shelters and RTI. So I was looking at where the difference was. I was assuming that bus facilities was different from bus shelters RTI, but it sounds though it's probably not.
I suspect it's whether
one is the TCF local contribution. It just looks like it's been expanded in that instance. So one of them, effectively, the lower section where it says TCF local contribution to bus shelters / RTI, those will be on or in the vicinity of the corridors that are being proposed for delivery as part of Transforming Cities Fund. The other area above would be other routes that aren't in those areas.
Thank you, that makes perfect sense.
Okay, thank you. That's great, thank you. Councillor Brooke.
Part of Christchurch is the ward of Highcliffe and Warkford, and we have the A337, which gives a route from New Milton, Leamington, through to Bournemouth and beyond. This is a main artery of increasing traffic coming through the conurbation. As part of the Parish Council's initiation in April has been the preparation of a neighbourhood plan, and extensive consultation has taken place in workshops and with residents in a number of ways, and the recurring feedback is the dangerous conditions that exist in what is the local shopping facility or district centre of Highcliffe Village itself. This, I think, is a matter of discussion outside this room with the highways team. I'm looking at all the bullet points as part of the local transport plan, and I think we can probably tick off all of those in terms of concerns that we have, not only from people falling over on badly formed pavements and breaking their hips, to the cyclists who insist upon cycling down the paths because the road is too dangerous, and the list goes on. We have local cycling groups who have experienced accidents of cyclists pulling out and being hit by cars. I would be interested, as first off, if you could please send me what was actually in the South East Dorset Transport Study, which actually relates to the Highcliffe area. Please, I'd like to see that, so we actually have a sort of a base to start on. Chair, I do appreciate this goes beyond actually what's on the agenda this evening, but I think this is an opportunity to kick off the need of consideration and then on to study as to what needs to happen in this particular locality. Things which have come back from residents and others much go about climate and ecological considerations, and that then leads on to a better design of a lot of the areas through the village itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's probably three parts to that. One is on a regeneration front. We're obviously looking at the town centres. We also need to look at the district centres, and there's places like Winton that have done some work around that already, which I think I mentioned to you. From a maintenance perspective, we haven't come to that yet, but that's the bit afterwards. So there's something about if there are dangerous elements of footways and highways, then that maybe is part of what needs to be prioritised within the maintenance schedule. And then there is something about are there schemes to improve the highway specifically, which might come under this programme. So I guess it's how we weave the ambitions of Highcliffe in with those three elements, and how we do that for all the other district centres as well.
Just to add, a decision of the parish this very evening is to start to gain meaningful evidence in highway terms, so that our highways colleagues can properly understand the dynamics of what's actually going on in that area. We feel the evidence base is much that they'll want to see, and the parish should be able to help them in that respect.
I think that's helpful. But I think we need to make sure we're working with, obviously the officers are trying to work across the whole BCP area and match this amount of money, which is far less than we'd want to spend overall, against the highest priorities, and how we make sure that some of that comes your way. I'm going to go to Councillor Rice.
Yep. Thank you. There's some. There looks like there's some really good stuff in here. But I just wanted to speak about the business travel network. I don't know how much you were spending on that before, but through the work that I'm doing, I'm finding that it's done some great work previously, and with the climate change agenda and the difficulties of tackling the carbon footprint of transportation across the area. Obviously, a lot of, as a local authority working with businesses, this is going to be a huge opportunity to get modal shift, and I'm just wondering about sort of if there's any opportunity for further investment in that, because it's a hugely sort of influential area of work that I'm coming at, sort of identifying is needing a lot of effort, I suppose. But just to highlight that.
Thank you. So that's quite a small sum. Can you identify where that's coming from? It's coming from other sources. Is that from the business community themselves?
Yeah.
That particular sum, the 22,000, is from the South East Dorset Transport Contribution Scheme, which was a scheme that predated the SIL, which is Community Infrastructure Levy. That's just really to top up some revenue-based activity with some capital improvements that have been identified. What I would draw your attention to is the line below, which is the Transforming Cities Fund Local Contribution, Workplace and School Facilities. So that's the capital budget that's being proposed that could be effectively set up for businesses and schools that are part or participate in the sort of travel planning proposals and that we're engaged with. They can be invited to effectively bid to the council for monies to effectively improve facilities either in the vicinity or on the premises. So it's something that we're actively trying to develop. But what we don't want to do is, for example, put £200,000 or £300,000 in that year and then see it not spent or delivered because that 200, 200 or 300,000 pounds that we've not spent could have actually been invested in other bits of infrastructure in year, which would benefit the wider public. So it's something that we would recommend could grow and expand as that area of our activity grows and expands.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we're working with partners, and particularly public health are interested in some of these softer change schemes, and we've got to work with all parties on that.
I mean, historically, just for a bit of added background, from the sort of sovereign authorities within Bournemouth and Poole, in the Poole area, we identified this area of funding before, and I think in a sort of not too distant past, we had an allocation for this, and in a year we didn't actually have any applications from any businesses or any schools for improvements, and that was subsequently sort of shut down, for want of a better word, whereas in Bournemouth it's been promoted and funded a bit more following the Be Smart activity, and so we're just trying to gradually build it. What we don't want to do, as I say, is overcommit it and then find that we can't deliver the proposals, as I say, and then other areas of the BCP miss out where there could have been a pedestrian crossing installed, or there could have been, some other feature or improvement scheme, a cycle lane put in, etc. And obviously, what I would add is this is a programme, so just in terms of the capital programme monitoring, this programme can change and adjust throughout the year as the needs are identified or otherwise. Just to close that off.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think as we make big investments, particularly the TCF, I will be challenging, and I hope we will be challenging schools and businesses to respond and to look at their travel patterns and make it happen. Sorry, Julian.
Yeah, I just wanted to endorse what Councillor Rice has said in the importance of changing behaviours. As we said earlier, we haven't got the massive amount of funding from government for that purpose, but I think there are ways and means, and I foresee that the good work that's been done right across the conurbation so far, albeit with one or two staff, is in need of boosting in some way, whether it be staff time or whether it be some funding from other sources. But actually it's a key to determining it. And when we do actually take the time and effort, as we have done in the past, both for large and small scale employers in the area, it's opened their eyes to actually what the real choice is. I think most of the people that we have visited, I won't mention any by name, but it's abundantly clear that once we walk through the doors, that they have no idea what the alternative choices are for more sustainable transport that already exist, irrespective of all this fantastic work that we aim to do. So it's actually about education. It's about the management of those businesses, understanding what their staff are going through, and the fact that many of the staff don't actually have a car in some cases, and they just don't know. So a lot of this is about providing advice and opening the doors in terms of choice. So absolutely keen, because actually it doesn't take too much time for officers to do that, and as a strategic authority I think it's vital that we do that, because we're facing congestion otherwise.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Green. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to go.
Yes, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. I realise that not everybody was able to attend the training meeting and the pre-meeting last week, but I think it is really important. With greatest respect to Councillor Brooks for sticking up, particularly for his ward and his residents. There was a brief discussion on the makeup of this Transport Advisory Group, and I do think it is really, really important that it's not used as an opportunity for pushing ward issues specifically. And the reason that I would say that, as we know, this group has been put together in an interesting way as far as the membership is concerned. If it were to be used for ward issues, then I think that certainly the Conservative group would want to get that revisited. I believe that we should be here to be advising you and Cabinet on the decisions that you will be making on this, and for all of us to be looking at this from a BCP-wide point of view. rather than as ward councillors.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Obviously, it's difficult sometimes to detach the two, and while you're here to make a point about things, I guess. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I only mention it because in the district centre we have had serious accidents, and that's been as a consequence of a design of the highway arrangements must be 45 years ago. We sit between a very active, growing area of New Milton and beyond, and a lot of those people are coming through this part of the conurbation to work in Bournemouth and Poole and elsewhere. The matter that we have raised has not come about because it seems to be a whim. It's come about because we can see that there are genuine problems.
Okay, that's fine. And
I would thank you for the opportunity to mention it.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And just for the record, when we were looking at the routes initially, and I said, what's in it for Highcliffe as part of the TCF? Part of that is obviously some of our contributions are not just on the routes; they're about other things which do extend into all parts of the conurbation. But it is about we're here to bring our expertise and to discuss and make sure we are fighting for everybody around the patch. So I think the comment was well made. I'm going to come to Councillor Farquhar first.
Thank you, Chair. I thank Councillor Green for bringing politics to the table. Since we're on the subject of politics, then, from a voter's perspective, perhaps the officer can help me out. I forget which particular election it was, but there was a promise made to the public regarding potholes as an election promise. Whereabouts in this plan is our share of the BCP of that pothole money? If I had one of my residents ask me, so I could point it out to them.
So that's on the next page, isn't it? We have got a bid in, as I understand it, to a pothole fund, which I guess is probably the fund that they announced. But
various pots that they
can you use the microphone? Thank you.
There's various pots that they tend to rebadge and determine that they're for pothole and for road improvements, and it seems that they essentially recycle the funding and redistribute it through communications. If you look at the orange sheets, that gives a 3-year programme for kind of highways maintenance works, and within that there are several pots of funding for resurfacing type activity. So whilst there isn't significant funding for potholes, and we are limited, what we have we use to our best advantage. So it sits within the highway maintenance scheme. It's also part of our revenue budget for maintenance, regular maintenance, and so there's various pots that we can draw down from to support specifically kind of pothole remedial measures.
I think
thank you, Chair. Just for clarity then, who is this they that you refer to that have renamed the pot?
Sorry, that would be the DFT and central government.
Thank you, that's helpful. Richard?
Yeah, what I was going to say is the structural maintenance area, it's actually the total that's at the bottom of the 2021, which is the 250,000 in terms of million, essentially that is based on a couple of elements. There's just the general award from DFT based on the extensiveness of our network, as in the length of our network, the number of structures, and there's a formula and a calculation which is used to basically determine how much each local authority is awarded nationally of the overall pot. As part of that, what we have to do is we also get awarded an extra amount called the incentive fund element, and the incentive fund element is basically based on us being what's described as a Band 3 authority. And effectively what we've had to do is we've had to demonstrate to DFT over a series of years that we are managing our highway asset in the most efficient way possible. And if we weren't a Band 3 authority, we would receive less money from the DFT in this area. I don't think this is explicitly set out in this particular report.
It does reference it.
It does reference it. There you go. Sorry, not the author of this one. This is Tim. What tends to happen with DFT is they make an announcement in the autumn statement that we're going to receive some pothole funding. Okay, that's not generally declared right up until the end of March of that financial year. So the likelihood is we will receive a letter between now and the end of March actually stating how much money we've been awarded as part of the pothole fund. And what we would do then is at a subsequent TAG meeting, when we've got a capital monitoring report, we will basically report that as a consequence, as following the autumn announcement in 2019 that there will be additional pothole funding, we've now got a letter and we're awarded this, and it's going to be added to the programme, and these are the schemes that it's going to be set out to deliver. So we do generally wrap that up and report it to you. I understand that the pledge that was made in the autumn, in this particular autumn, was to actually increase the amount that we're going to receive by, I think it was about fourfold in terms of that pothole element. What I would say is that what we have to do is we have to deliver that based on the priorities of the conurbation. So we have effectively, what happens is the road is scanned each year. One side of the road one year, one side of the road the next year. The basically results of that scan effectively determine what the condition of that network is, what the condition of the highway asset is. And effectively, what it also does, depending on the type of structure of the carriageway, whether it's a stone mastic asphalt or if it's a concrete road, for example, or any other type of bitumen, effectively there's a sort of defined route of treating that section of highway. So what the highway asset management plan focuses on is that there's some roads that are already just beyond prevention. They're already basically going to need full construction. There are other roads which are borderline that actually if we get in and we treat or we seal, we can actually safeguard for the next decade or so. And effectively what we do is we follow that process to work out what the most effective way of coverage our highway network is. Now there are obviously in some instances areas where there's sections of carriageway which are in the equal condition, and then obviously some of the schemes as well are actually too large to basically be covered by our structural maintenance. So I think Councillor earlier referred to an A road, which is say for example the Dorset Way or the Wessex Way. When you've got 3.7 million to invest across your entire network for also street lighting, bridge maintenance, it doesn't really get you very far. And what we have done as part of that process is we've actually applied for things like the Challenge Fund competition. We've previously been successful with that, and we've then deployed programs where we've undertaken large-scale maintenance. And part of this report sets out, in fact, a Challenge Fund bid as well. So we've made a Challenge Fund bid for I think about £4.2 million to basically boost this structural maintenance programme. So I'm just trying to give you a bit more background. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Thank you, Chair. That is very helpful. So, in summary, we'll wait until March then for this letter from the DFT. Thank you.
But I guess the other part of that is encouraging people to report if they see potholes. If we don't know about them, we don't fix them. And on an individual pothole basis, that's environmental services rather than transportation. But it is about encouraging people to report them as the first step. So if people are complaining about them, have you reported it? Might be your first immediate response. Councillor Howe.
Three quick points. Firstly, with regard to Councillor Brooks' point, we as Cabinet very much want to introduce a local centres subcommittee, which we feel that the local centres have been kind of left out of the equation for a number of years, and we very much want to have a focus. And the idea would be that that committee of members would have a kind of rolling brief to look at maybe one local centre every 3 months, go for a walk around it, speak to the local community, could address transport, economic, community issues, and get us a kind of, it's almost like a place audit, so then we understand what the basic issues are, and then they may not be able to be addressed immediately, but they're sitting there and the various departments can be alerted to the issues, and at least we're keeping track of things. And I've already been approached by a crime Christchurch, or Highcliffe Town Councillor, who has asked me to put Highcliffe at the top of the list when that actually committee does materialise, which I hope it will. Second one about potholes. It's very brief. The road at the back of my house has just had some potholes in for quite a long time, and then recently somebody came on and chucked some tarmac in, and now they're already coming out. One of them's just lasted about 2 or 3 days. Another one's just degrading, and you talked about how you have different solutions for different potholes. This looked very much like somebody who just wandered around and chucked some tarmac in it and hoped that would fix the problem. So maybe there's something about not having to do repeat business in potholes. And just in real time as well, as somebody who uses buses a lot, I've been frustrated over a long period of time about how real time is talked about and is never actually delivered. And for a long time, as I understand it, people were talking about real time when there was no connection between when the buses would arrive and the information being displayed on the screens, because that information was coming from timetables and not from the buses. Yet it seems in the modern world, one would think all you need is like a GPS connection on the bus and some software program, and you should be able to do it relatively easily. But still, in the last few days, I've had buses that have been not advertised, and suddenly they appear on the board 1 minute ago. Where was that bus? I've been standing here for 15 minutes and that bus wasn't on the board until 1 minute ago. And then another bus says 6 minutes, and turn your head, it actually arrives 6 minutes early than it says on the board. So it's difficult to understand how that real time system is working. Because clearly it's not working in some instances. So yeah, it would be interesting to understand at another time how it's intended actually to make that work properly.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that you've obviously had some issues with the bus and the real time information. Have you reported that to anybody out of interest?
Well, it's not. It happens reasonably frequently, and it's not something I think anybody would know that there's an easy way to report.
Well,
it, so.
If you experience that, obviously the main point of contact is obviously with our area. Feel free to contact myself if you're still experiencing that, and I'll get that looked into as soon as possible. There's obviously the bus operators themselves that have got lines, but what we have recently is we've the bus companies have actually updated all their GPS equipment on their buses through what's called a ticketer system. So actually that should no longer be the case. So I'm not sure how recently it was, and I'm really disappointed to hear that that's happened. And you're right though, historically, when that GPS equipment was not on the buses, the timetables just used to, in some instances, just reflect what should be happening as opposed to what was actually happening. But nowadays it should all be GPS based. So I'll take that back, and if you want to give me the details after this, then I can obviously follow that up.
So it happened to me not so long ago. I did ask, and it was when the bus lost contact that effectively it reverted to the timetable. But it sounds like that was very recent. So
we're obviously trying to bottom that out, and we're really keen to know and gather intelligence on when that is the case, so we can address that with them.
Great. So real examples would be really helpful. So when you're standing in the bus.
Winton and number 2 squared pool.
Okay. Yeah.
The buses, I can say
Yeah.
that.
Lovely, thank you. So the potholes, again, that's back with Environmental Services, and unfortunately Fizz has left us. We don't have any officers from that department, but I've raised that with them because I've experienced a number of places where I've reported a pothole, and within weeks it's all back to gravel again.
There is obviously an obvious initial impact of the council trying to avoid, obviously injuring somebody. So there often is just somebody will go out with some cold lay or deferred asphalt and just in the first instance infill the hole. That's not the permanent fix. It's just to make sure that anybody walking along isn't going to trip over that and injure themselves. And what you'll often find is they'll come back and actually do a proper cut and then actually reinstate it fully. So I'm hopeful that in the instance you've described, that they will come back and treat it. Just one other thing just to add earlier, and I appreciate time's running by, but although it's addressed as the pothole fund, it is all about pothole prevention. So it is actually about identifying clusters of potholes and actually treating areas in the most efficient way possible. So, I think obviously from a kind of public perspective, when government announce it, in plain terms, it's very much they're going to go out and fill in all the potholes. But actually what it is it's more money to do more strategically worked out highway maintenance.
Okay, that's lovely, thank you. I'll draw that one to a close. So the next item is the forward plan. And you'll see there are some reasonably significant issues that are planned to come up for our next meeting in February, including a petition from Branksome Park and Camper Cliffs around vehicle speeds. Any comments on that one before we... No? Okay. So the last item, I think, was our next... Let's just check. Dates and times of future meetings. So we have got meetings forward for the next year and a bit. And it doesn't actually say the time. This meeting is at 7. That's partly because it makes it possible for me. But I think it's also quite useful in terms of members of the public if they choose to come. It's always a balance because the daytime meeting would suit the retired and an evening meeting would suit those in work. How's Trent?
Yeah. Can I propose that it remains at 7? As I say, it's certainly... I know that we've had this discussion elsewhere, but meetings that start at 6 o'clock involve going to the meeting in peak hour traffic, and for some people it just doesn't work out. I know I've got a colleague that's got young children, and a 7 o'clock meeting you can have put them to bed and left them with a babysitter sort of thing. A 6 o'clock meeting, there's just no way it works out, and I think 7 o'clock is a reasonable time. And from the point of view of the members of the public, 7 o'clock enables them to come home from work, get to the meeting, say their bit or whatever, and I think it's a far better time. And I think future meetings aren't going to last this long, because I think this was a catch-up meeting. Yeah. So
I think that's helpful. I do appreciate that it's a burden for the officers, and if they've done a full day and then they're expected to stay late, then that's a problem for them. So we do need to try and be crisp in perhaps some of our deliberations as we go forward. But I think some of the things that's useful to have a wider chat today.
What we do is we look at the response from the public prior to the meeting as well. So we try to do the agenda so that the public aren't hanging around for sort of 6 or 7 reports to then say their piece for 5 minutes. So we do try to arrange it so that it's helpful for the public.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments on that? For that. So venues. Again, one of the comments was that people, in terms of representations from people, that would it be better if we move things around? Obviously, this venue is central to the conurbation, so it makes it less difficult for some people to get right the way across if it's in Christchurch or in Poole. Are we comfortable to stay in Bournemouth? Would we like to move?
Happy to stay here.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of where we're heading generally. So but I think it's worth just agreeing. Yeah, okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you all very much for coming.